Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. They say you can't drink water on your face, but for Christina Finch it was a weak consolation. The girl did not shine with beauty and hated mirrors with all her soul. Hair of some unintelligible mouse color was not distinguished by emptiness. Small gray eyes, thin lips, wide potato-shaped nose. The sight of it all from the branch made me want to cry. She would not Finch, and the potatoes would not laugh Betty. The first beauty of the class knows with a good potato. But the boys giggled nastily, and Christina almost cried. But was it her fault she wasn't born as pretty as Betty? On the eve of prom night, the girls were just discussing outfits for their first adult prom, and Christina sighed quietly on the sidelines. Who cares what I wear? Doomedly thought she still will not become more beautiful. Potatoes, she asked Betty snidely. And Christina sighed. But here we go again. What's she going to say this time? Did you remember to buy a mask for graduation? The education department's gonna be there. Why scare them? The classmates burst out laughing, but Christina chose not to say anything. Actually, she was thinking of not going to the prom. To endure the ridicule on such a solemn day. Christina wasn't a masochist. She was looking forward to graduation, never to see her classmates again. Especially that arrogant Betty. More news splashed her mother. How is that interesting? Are you worse than the rest of them? To deprive yourself of such an important holiday. As if you do not understand then. The girl exclaimed bitterly. I'm as ugly as. Christina was silent, unable to come up with a comparison, and just waved my girl, but it's not about looks. Her mother tried to comfort her, but you're a smart girl and a good hostess, and what great essays do you write? It's good for you to say you're beautiful, and I'm me. Miranda, Christina's mother, was indeed an attractive woman. When she was young she had dark hair and dark eyes, and a woman with a sweet figure broke more than one man's heart, but she chose Vovka Finch. He was not handsome, but reverently treated his then future wife, and knew how to make money. From him Christina inherited such a prominent nose, and everything else except Christina and Finch. Theirs was the youngest son, David. Unlike his sister, the boy grew up real handsome like his mother. What a joke nature had made. What a joke, said the villagers. I wish Christina had taken after her mother. She's a girl, and it's enough for a boy to be prettier than a monkey. Christina, though she loved her little brother, sometimes she found herself envying him. What injustice indeed. After all, for a boy, beauty is really an attribute not necessary. The beautiful Miranda fell in love with him, not the handsome one, but kind and caring. But boys like Betty want a pretty girl. From time to time, Miranda urged her daughter to experiment with hairstyles and light makeup. Not for school, of course, but the girl only waved it off. But she didn't believe in a magical transformation, unless she got plastic surgery. It seems to be possible to do it from the age of 16, but with written parental consent. But where's the money coming from? Christina did go to the prom. Her parents bought her a dress from a soft pink background, and the graduation outfit sat on a slim girl's figure, as in a cast, and white shoes, and a miniature handbag in tone perfectly complemented the festive image. What's the use? Tragic voice, said the graduate. You can't hide your face anyway. Miranda nodded. You don't have to, but you can make it more beautiful. Christina sighed heavily. I don't believe it, she muttered. Wanna bet? Smiled Miranda. Christina's godmother, Aunt Wendy, who worked as a hairdresser, gave her a cascade haircut and put into a chic ceremonial hairstyle the girl's hair, decorated with small nooks, and somehow magically turned from machines into ashes and daffodils. Oblique asymmetrical. Slightly bunched teacher distracted attention from the large nose, and light youth makeup refreshed and softened the features of the face. It wasn't me, Christina exclaimed in surprise. The girl looked at herself in the mirror and couldn't believe it was her. No, goddaughter, it's you. Aunt Wendy smiled. It's just like in a Cinderella fairy tale. First ball, a beautiful dress and a fairy godmother. The only thing missing is the wicked stepmother carriage. Christina laughed merrily and said there's no need for a wicked stepmother. And there is no need for a carriage either. After a little thought, the girl with a sigh added, I'll turn into a pumpkin anyway. Christina, what a pessimism, fairy godmother shook her head. You are entering adulthood, which is exciting in itself, and such a decadent mood. Wendy, for the better. You'll go off to study in the city. You'll have new friends and a new life, and everything will be different. And the carriage won't turn into a pumpkin. Wendy knew that her godmother was being made fun of at school and was very worried about it. Therefore, she sincerely wanted Christina to rub the nose of all the offenders. While Wendy was transforming her favorite, Miranda went for a manicure. When she came back to see her daughter, she couldn't believe her eyes. And I always said you should experiment, Miranda said. At the prom, Christina made a splash. I've always known that any girl can be a beauty. Thank you. She smiled shyly, noticing Betty's disgruntled eyes. Of course she did. After all, she wasn't the center of attention. Christina had never liked school nights. All the girls would slow dance with the guys, and she would stand against the wall and pretend she didn't really want to. This night was different. Almost all the guys in the class invited Christina, except for the gym teacher and the computer teacher. Christina, you look beautiful tonight. The latter complimented her. Parents looked at their daughter with pride and smiled, and Christina was sure that only good things were ahead of her. Such a beginning of adult life, she liked it very much. Morning, the end of August, a marshraka and a heavy bag in her hands. So begins the school year of a student living in a dormitory. I guess you're going to study? Christina asked, a grandmother of a noble appearance, sitting next to her. Yes, nodded the girl. And what will you be? Philologist. She smiled. What kind of beast is that? Squinted his grandmother, but hesitated. How to explain more lucidly to the elderly passenger? Who is a philologist? It's a person who studies the history of languages. Well, after graduating from uni, I can teach Russian language and literature at school, and I can work in a publishing house. Respectfully stretched grandmother. Well then, study. Just look, no temptation to succumb to any temptations, because there are such sprouts who go to study. And the old woman looked meaningfully at Christina, and she almost giggled. In general, personal life is not an obstacle to study, if, of course, do not lose your head. But how can you explain it to the older generation? I'll tell you so edifying. Said the old woman, a decent girl will not go by the hand and will definitely wait for her soulmate. Deal. With bitter irony, thought Christina, but I with my looks, it is definitely not threatened. In the words of grandmother, something else broadcasts something about the consequences of relationships with guys before marriage. But Christina listened with half an ear. In fact, in the last days before the departure, she thought not only about how she would study. The girl imagined how she would meet a guy and they would start dating. And one day the guy would say he loves her. Dream on and dream on. I injected myself with Christina. Have you seen yourself in the mirror lately? For a guy to want to meet you, you need to pay attention, and they only look at the beautiful ones. Actually, it wasn't that sad. The sensation she made at the prom greatly encouraged her, and Christina finally took charge of her appearance. The morning after the first adult prom, the girl unraveled her hair in front of the mirror and was amazed to realize the cascade. Her haircut, not thick hair, has gained volume. Their color became more interesting, but most importantly, the nose visually reduced. Wow, Christina shared this metamorphosis. Aunt Wendy is a miracle worker. And why didn't I listen to my mom? The dark blue jeans and beige coat were not new, but combined with the new hair and makeup in soft colors, they looked new. And yet Christina didn't feel confident in herself. Oh, and then there's that grandma. Stopping this thought, the girl wanted to say something nice to her, but the grandmother had to go out. But the old woman smiled patronizingly. Good luck with your studies. Girl. Thank you, smiled Christina. The next stop was the university. The entourage lifted the heavy bag, and it seemed to her that just a little more, and she would break under the weight of the bag. "Let me help you," offered a man sitting across the aisle. Together they pulled the sports bag out of the bus, and Christina, thanking her traveling companion, took a breath and moved on. But it was easy for the girl to say it seemed that the bag, which Miranda generously filled with potatoes, salty creations, and other snow, weighs twice, if not 3 times more than she herself. "Can I help you?" Christina heard a woman's voice, and a woman's voice. In front of her stood a tall, thin, smiling girl who looked remarkably like Julia Roberts. She was about the same age as Christina. The girl looked at the bulk, and her gaze expressed sympathy. "Well, I don't know," Christina said shyly. "If it's no trouble, it's no trouble," assured the student. After that, they picked up the bag and carried it. It was about 30 meters to the dormitory, but to Christina it seemed like kilometers. On the way, the girls stopped 3 times and had time to get acquainted. Unexpectedly, and the assistant's name was Kelly, and she, like Christina, entered the Faculty of Philology. "So maybe we'll be placed together," Kelly suggested excitedly. "Why, am I on my own?" Christina thought. "Oh my God, am I going to have a friend?" She didn't have any friends at school. Her classmates did nothing but bully Christina. The only exception was Clara, but she'd been friends with Vanessa and Kanishev since she was a kid. Girls from other classes did not pay any attention to Christina at all, except for her nose. "Ugh," girls exhaled, having reached the watch. "You haven't checked in yet?" asked the elderly janitor, turning to Christina. "No," and the janitor shook her head. "Went to get the commandant." Christina was put in the same room with a new acquaintance. "Don't forget to register in the dormitory," said the commandant, whose name was Olga Vasilievna, and the girls headed for the elevator. The room in which Christina was to live for 5 whole years, unless, of course, she was expelled, was on the 7th floor. Kelly had been living in the dormitory for the 4th day, so she felt familiar. However, there was no hint of showing off, so Christina immediately felt sympathy for her roommate and sincerely hoped that they would become friends. "Yeah, I remember when I moved in," Kelly giggled. "I got off the bus and my suitcase handle broke. It was a good time. Couldn't have broken in the room." Christina laughed merrily. Kelly so interestingly presented the most mundane things, and you could listen to it endlessly. "And how did you get out of it?" asked Christina. "But the world is not without good people," Kelly hummed. On the way to the dorm, got a kind guy who did not leave the lady alone with 15 pounds of stuff. "Lucky," nodded Christina. "That's true. There are still some gentlemen out there. It's a shame the kid was busy, though." We entered the dormitory, and at the entrance stands his girlfriend. "She's pretty, by the way. She's like the moon to me." And he said, "I helped the girl carry her suitcase." And the girl said, "Oh, you're so good for me. You weren't jealous?" "No, jealous of me." Kelly laughed. "Please, you should see this doll. Dark hair down to her waist, blue eyes." "Well, I'm no match for her, but you're not ugly either," Christina said. "But you're not ugly either," said Christina. "She looks like Julia Roberts. Same duck nose," smirked the future classmate. She sighed. "You'd like my nose." "What nose?" philosophically remarked Kelly. "Any flaw can be minimized or turned into a virtue." And noticing how Christina shook with laughter, perplexed asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm just..." She choked with laughter. "I just imagined how to turn my nose into a virtue." "You this," Christina deafeningly laughed. Tears came to her eyes. Kelly, looking at her friend, joined her, and in a few seconds the girls were laughing like clockwork. Unless they were Whoopi Goldberg. Through the laughter said Christina, "Well, what are you for pussyfooting around as a beauty?" "I, by the way, do not understand why Julia was invited for this role." "Noted," answered Kelly. "There are prettier actresses in Hollywood, and in my opinion, she fit the role perfectly." "You're right. You're good," she said approvingly. You can laugh at yourself. You know, a little silent, thoughtfully said Christina. And I just now realize how important it is to be able to laugh at yourself. If I had been able to do that when I was in school, I wouldn't have been bullied. Kelly looked at her sympathetically. You were bullied, and it was because of your looks, Kathy. Well, you'll show them. He who laughs last laughs. Fuck it. Christina, I don't know about you. What are the 2 days left before the school year starts? I intend to have fun, Kelly announced. So today we're going out on the town. Maybe not today. Christina asked hesitantly. Why wait? As they say, why put off for tomorrow what you can do today? Well, I don't know. But I do know cheerfully, exclaimed Kelly. Today, and not a day later. Christina realized it was useless to argue with her new friend. And then she realized that she didn't really want to. But to change her life for the better even more so. So what was the point? Because, as you know, water doesn't flow under a lying stone. You should wear a little brighter lipstick, said Kelly, critically examining Christina's makeup. Kelly, take pity on me, she begged. You're not gonna believe this, but this is the first time I've ever worn lipstick to prom. Oh, come on. I never would have guessed. Is there such a thing? It does. Christina sighed. And I regret it very much. All the girls at the disco danced medals with boys, and I at best danced with some sister in misfortune. You're a great girl, Kelly said quietly, squeezing her hand. You're going to be fine. Thank you. Christina also quietly replied gratefully, looking at her friend. Hey, gorgeous. Do you need Richard Gere? The girls heard a cheerful male voice. Towards them walked 2 guys. One of them was a tall, handsome blonde. He was looking at Kelly with interest. The other was shorter, not as handsome, and frowning. He was looking around absent-mindedly and clearly not in the mood for introductions. And who do we have here? Richard Gere, Kelly said cheerfully. Of course, I answered the guy and smiled disarmingly. All I was missing was Julia Roberts, and I think I found her. Yeah, they don't seem to be married. The girl laughed out loud. She clearly liked the guy, and Kelly flirted as hard as she could. The girl was smiling, and there was a playful note in her voice. Christina suddenly felt like a complete fool. Richard Gere's friend showed no interest in her. In fact, he shouldn't have been. If his friend had his eye on Kelly, it did not mean that he himself must necessarily pay attention to Christina. Kelly's new admirer's name was Stephen, and his frowny friend's name was James. Guys, why don't we go to the cafe? Stephen suggested. But I'd love to. Kelly said firmly. Really, Christina? Well, I guess so, she mumbled hesitantly. James, are you okay? Stephen asked his friend. I don't mind. James replied with a shrug. And soon they were sitting at the table and chatting merrily, destroying mouth-reading cakes with hot flavored coffee. How about something stronger, girls? Stephen made a new suggestion. In tandem with James, he was clearly the dominant one. What's that? Kelly giggled. Well, like champagne. The idea was well received, and 10 minutes later the guys were back from serving, with 2 bottles of beer, a drink, and a large dish. Start. That's our way, Christina whispered to Kelly, and she nodded languidly. Hey, what are you doing out of sorts? It's okay. Kelly looked at her friend incredulously, but the guys were coming to the table, so she didn't say anything. And then Kelly remembered what Christina had said about being bullied at school, which meant she was unlikely to be invited to parties. Her friend was clearly feeling out of place, and it was no surprise. Kelly really liked Stephen. Yeah, but what about the secular and the bitter? Actually, it would have been great if they were a couple, but James showed no signs of paying attention to Christina, and she, in turn, just didn't know how to behave in company. We'll learn. Kelly smiled to herself and turned to her friend Christina. Will you keep me company in the ladies' room? Christina nodded, and the girlfriends retired to the common areas. Christina whispered excitedly, Kelly, come on. What are you doing? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Oh, rounded on her eyes. Do you like this James guy even a little bit? I don't know, Christina shrugged. Guy's a guy, but he's crazy about you. What makes you say that? She was surprised. I could read it in his eyes. She lied with inspiration. Don't you realize James is just like you? He just needs a nudge. A nudge. What nudge? But you need to let James know you're interested in him. Frankly, Christina wasn't sure she was interested in James at all. But as her father used to say, I can't expect a prince on a white horse with my looks. She thought gloomily and wondered how to do it. Simple, exclaimed Kelly, educated by the fact that the ice has moved. Don't sit there like a mouthful of water. Participate in the conversation. Turn to James more often. Laugh and smile, and everything will be okay. It's just a matter of getting started. But come on, the guys are waiting. At first, Christina was not easy to keep the conversation, but then she was surprised to realize that it was not difficult at all. And 2 glasses of champagne did their job. Now it seemed to her that James was very well suited to a gloomy expression. It was a trick. As the guys walked them to the shuttle bus, James asked Christina to meet him. But did you? Embarrassed and blushing, he said, You'll give me your phone number. Write it down. The girl smiled. And so it turned out that the world of love became richer for 2 more couples. Despite the fact that it was not easy to learn, Christina get high. All the same, it was not in vain that I dreamed of graduating soon, thought the girl. Here she made friends, and life in general, sung by a character from a famous sitcom, turned out to be fun and interesting, especially if you are still a freshman and all the discoveries ahead. Everything that happened in the dorm brought Christina in indescribable delight. Student parties, secret sleepovers of local students, joint preparation of dishes from everything that found in the refrigerator at the end of the week with the subsequent tasting, and even cues in the shower did not strain. But on the contrary, you nights living in the dorm, Christina mastered the art of quick washing in the shower. And after a month it ceased to seem something terrible to her. What can I say? The first month of dorm life passed under the motto, everything that doesn't kill us makes us stronger. From now on, Christina Finch was a typical homegirl used to going to bed and waking up in silence. No, yes, and had to go to the trouble of listening to music at 0 o'clock. And no one cared that she had a colloquium tomorrow. But my mom's pies and cutlets in the amount she wanted were now eaten once every 2 weeks. That is, when Christina came home for the weekend. And yet for the first time in her life, Christina Finch could say in good conscience that she was perfectly happy, especially compared to what Christina had put up with. For 11 years of high school life, she also had a boyfriend. Putting her hand on her heart, Christina did not feel for James that not earthly feeling, which so beautifully and juicily described in love novels. Rather, she was attracted to a fundamentally new role as someone's girlfriend. And is it love? Pondered Christina. Otherwise, how to explain the fact that Kelly, after a month and a half of relationship with Stephen, found another admirer of Hollywood diva and did not hesitate to move to him? Better no way, snickered her friend. I'm too young to get hung up on one guy, and I wouldn't advise you to. Christina, let's be honest. You're not in love, are you? No, she said yes. Do you want to? Kelly winked. It happens. It happens. Yeah, if it happens, the answer is automatically yes. Here's the thing, Christina. You and I are going out to a nightclub on Saturday. Oh no. Oh yes, I'm going home on Saturday. Christina remembered. Not a problem. Let's go next. Christina only sighed doomfully. It's not like Christina didn't realize that dating a guy on the basis of being cute wasn't a good idea, as well as the fact that it's better a bird in the hand than a crane in the sky. By the way, the second was even truer, at least for Christina. But she had no idea how to tell the guy that it was over between them, just because she wished for African passions and pink clouds. But the Finch branch had no experience with guys. James was the kind of guy they say was neither fish nor flesh. He wasn't much of a talker, and he wasn't particularly proactive. And Kelly said he was incapable of action. Did Stephen say something to you? Christina assumed. I can see that. Poked her friend. No, really, Christina. But he's just like that. In a word, he's not. Didn't you want to set me up with him? She reminded me. But I did, Kelly shrugged. It's more fun to be friends together. And then perhaps the breakup with her neighbor had spurred her to find a new boyfriend for her friend too, to make it more fun to be friends. Well, if anyone was interested, it certainly wasn't Christina. The guy was courting her because that's the pattern. They had everything that is usually present in a young person's relationship, a candy bouquet period, trips to the movies where they took seats for kissing. They even had a first night, but it was all kind of stale and soulless. To come up with something original and memorable. No, not James. It's like James was just a stranger to romance. So maybe it was for the best that he wasn't romantic, her godmother said thoughtfully. When Christina came home for the weekend, she stopped by for tea. What is he studying for? A mechanical engineer. The girl smiled. At the Polytechnic Institute. But it's not the most romantic profession, Aunt Wendy remarked. I don't think it's the profession. She didn't agree. She disagreed with her godmother. My friend Kelly was dating a friend of his who goes to school there. So Stephen would surprise her, send her touching texts. He'd give her a little bouquet just because he was walking past some old lady selling flowers and thought of her. Dating? Yes. They broke up. Christina nodded. Why did they break up if they were doing so well? The godmother hummed incredulously. And Kelly wanted a change. The girl grinned. Yeah. Aunt Wendy grinned back. I guess I'm getting old. I don't get it. It was all good, but it lacked variety. Yes. She told me to follow her lead. By the way, what about you? Oh, I don't know. Christina answered with a sigh. Sometimes I think we're doing well. But it's boring without emotion. James and I have never had a fight. And the girls in the dorm say it's sometimes necessary to, like, shake things up. So maybe that's what it's all about. I don't know, Christina. I mean, you would know. But I think it's a lot simpler than that. You're just freaking out. By the way, how's he doing with his bad habits? Does not smoke with a touch of pride, answered the goddaughter. Drinks a little. And then only on special occasions. I beg you, exclaimed Aunt Wendy. A calm, non-drinking, non-smoking guy from the city is getting a higher education. And you intend to look for a good thing out of a good thing. I don't know. Maybe it's just a generational misunderstanding. But I'd advise you to stick with your James. Do you think, Christina, I wouldn't advise badly? My godmother said. I'm not. Besides, I have some experience in life. But what can a friend who hasn't even seen life yet advise? Yes, I guess you're right. Talking to Kathy put things into perspective. Thoughts of finding a replacement for James flickered and flickered in my head. And then they were safely put to rest. And no matter how much Kelly urged her to go to a club and meet an interesting guy, Christina was adamant. All 5 years of college life, Kelly and the rest of the girls in the dorm were having affairs. Christina was the only one still dating James. Almost everyone said that Christina Finch was wasting her time on relationships that wouldn't make her happy. But she didn't care. Christina didn't remember having a line of guys lining up behind her. So we'll make do with what we've got. Christina introduced James to her parents sophomore year. But what do you think of him? Heartbroken. She asked her mother. It's your boyfriend and your life, Miranda replied evasively. But we'll see. Maybe the mother, like the girls in the dormitory, had already had a premonition. By the way, James introduced Christina to his parents on the eve of the wedding, which did take place. Christina was finishing university and was preparing for defense, and the new groom worked at the factory. Having received a diploma 2 years earlier than Christina, he changed 3 jobs. Not a beauty, Vanessa shook her head. The mother of James, it was about the future daughter-in-law from whom she was not delighted. The meeting with the groom's parents had finally taken place, and it was not a pleasant one. James left to see Christina off the dormitory, and the mother-in-law was sharing her impressions with her husband. "No, not beautiful," the woman repeated. "Vanessa, please." Ethan wrinkled his nose. "She may not be beautiful, but our son chose her, and we must honor his choice and respect his choice." Vanessa shook her hands. "Ethan, what's there to respect? She's just a country girl who can't wait to settle down in the city." "Oh, come on. The girl has a college degree and can expect to get a good job in the city. Why not? Besides, Vanessa, are we of the Earl's class? Remember, my dear, where you come from. And I don't understand something," the wife exclaimed with indignation. "Are you reproaching me now?" "No, dear. I'm just reminding you that we are all human beings first of all, and the rest time will show where you saw her nose." "What's her nose got to do with it?" Ethan laughed. "You're inimitable. Just calm down. You don't have to live with her, James. He's a grown man, and I think he knows what he's doing. After all, they dated for 5 years. I think it's Christina." "Good girl, the girl," Vanessa muttered with a tightening of her lips. "The chorus girl. We know the chorus girl." Vanessa poked Christina's nose wherever she could. "Where you can't, though." It all started with choosing a place for the wedding banquet. Christina proposed to play a wedding in a country hotel complex, stylized under the old style. This option was suggested by Kelly, who not so long ago was there at the wedding of the sister of another boyfriend. "It's really cool out there," she told Christina excitedly. "And it's cheap. It's such a big place. Fresh air, nature." "Out of town, so out of town," James replied, listening to the bride's proposal. Oh, how Christina wanted to believe that for James her word was law. But deep down she knew that James simply didn't care. But his moment seemed to care, and rightly so. What else would one expect from a country girl? Circus Vanessa. Fresh air. What's missing is a harmonica, like at a village wedding. What's wrong with celebrating in the fresh air? Ethan said, "I'm sure there'll be lots of young people. Besides, it's fashionable to set off fireworks. But you must admit, it's easier to do it outdoors." "Maybe without much conviction," replied the wife. In the week before the wedding, the mother-in-law showed her creepy character in all its glory. One day, she and James came to visit, and the future mother-in-law, having sent her son for bread, started talking about the forthcoming marriage. "I hope the dress is decent," Vanessa asked arrogantly, referring to Christina's outfit for the wedding. "Quite dainty," she replied. "It's not like everyone's wearing cheesy mugs," snidely said the groom's mother. "That's the way it is in your village, right? God, well, when this manner of her son will stop hurting her small homeland." Yes, Christina was born and raised in the village. But what's so different? Her parents and brother are different from Vanessa, other than their residential address. Oh, those stereotypes that Christina thought were out of date, but apparently not for everyone. And pardon me, she won't let anyone shit on her head. She's not the same schoolgirl who was a victim of bullying for 11 years. And in our village, it is not customary, Christina parried. "As long as people love each other." "Please tell me," Vanessa said ironically. "What about you? Or just to settle down in the city? And at what price?" "It doesn't matter." "But why doesn't it matter?" "If it didn't matter, I wouldn't have gone to university." My future mother-in-law hated it. It was the country bumpkin who dared to contradict her. She'll answer for it. In the evening, James went to escort the bride to her dormitory, and when they reached it, the groom said, "Christina, Mom complained about you," she said. "And what did I do to displease her? That's all I needed." In 2 days, Christina has a diploma defense, and the showdown on the eve of the wedding was not in her plans. Mom said you insulted her. "James, but she didn't," Christina said, confused. "Honestly, I didn't say anything to Vanessa that would offend her. Maybe she misunderstood, but I didn't mean anything bad. But you understand me too. Your mom, Christina." He interrupted. "It would be better if you apologized to your mom." But why fight before the wedding? You have to admit it. He's right. Christina thought about it and said, okay, I'll apologize. Finch, did you catch Shiva? Kelly exclaimed in amazement. For what? I'm embarrassed to ask. Do you owe her an apology? Kelly, but it's not like it's gonna cost me anything. James is right. Why fight before the wedding? James is a mama's boy. Said it like a nail and a friend. And there's more to come. And I told you there were other options to consider. What can I say now? Sighed Christina. But by the way, Julia, to whom everyone compares me not only in beauty, played. Kelly winked. What's your point? She was in a movie about a wedding. Sang she. Christina wrinkled her forehead, remembering movies starring Julia Roberts. Best friend's wedding, she suggested. But what does that have to do with us? It has nothing to do with us. Of course. Kelly grinned. But the movie Runaway Bride is. Are you out of your mind? Yeah, I know you're not going to do that. You can't fantasize anymore. The day after graduation, Christina went to the village. Oh, Christina, I don't know what to say, Miranda said with a sigh. To be honest, I didn't really like your James right away. He's neither. In short, nothing. She smiled, remembering that Kelly had said the same thing about him. But we can't cancel the wedding, Christina said reasonably. The restaurant is booked. The dress is bought. That was true, her mother nodded. But she knew that some of the relatives had spoken up. Let him thank her for marrying her like that. Christina, you're not pretty. It's not nice. And then who says he only marries pretty girls? Take that Betty classmate from the branch. She got pregnant her freshman year. Who knows who the father is? Only her, and that's about it. There's a bad rumor going around about it. Like she doesn't know. Yeah, well, that's Betty's personal business. But the fact that she held Christina up about her looks has paid off in a big way. Betty's only 22. There's nothing left of beauty. She used to be pretty, but she's all gone. Now she was a tulip girl and a single mom. No, Miranda wasn't gloating. Though what's to hide? The thought of her daughter being an Adam had crossed her mind. But now Miranda wasn't so sure anymore. Yes, Christina had become, if not a beauty, quite a spectacular girl. Hair, makeup, good manicure. Against the background of all this splendor, even Two Big Nose looked not so terrible. But she didn't seem to be happy in this marriage. We'll see, Miranda thought philosophically. What's the point in getting yourself worked up? Finteflushki. Not without gloating, thought Christina. I have to disappoint you. Dear Vanessa. The wedding dress was magnificent, contrary to the expectations of the future mother-in-law. The bride rejected the model immediately. Lush, skirt of white chiffon and silk bodice. Nothing superfluous. The only decorative detail was a big cool rose on the shoulder. The bride's hair was styled in a high updo, and only one curl carelessly filed on the shoulder. Good enough to make Vanessa green with anger, so congratulations. In a condescendingly patronizing tone, she said, after the newlyweds agreed to walk through life with their other half, and exchanged rings. Welcome to our family. Emphasis on the word that somewhat shook the newly married daughter-in-law. Wow! And Christina thought she and James were starting their own family. After the solemn registration, the guests settled on cars and drove to the village, which was 20 kilometers from the city. But you are a happy mother. Fun? Asked Kelly. Happy, shortly said Christina. The witness on the groom's side was Stephen. The prospect of riding in the same car with her ex-boyfriend didn't bother Kelly at all. In fact, she asked how he was doing. Nothing, Stephen replied. There were a couple of kilometers to the village, when suddenly they saw a woman in a bright outfit, which on closer examination turned out to be a gypsy. What do you want to live? I'm fed up with the fool, shouted the driver of the car in which the married couple and witnesses were traveling, and sending a pen nonchalantly said the gypsy woman. I'll tell you what the young couple's family life will be like. I will tell you everything. Will you live in wealth or in poverty? I'll tell you about the children. Yes, fuck you. With annoyance interrupted her driver and was about to move off. But Christina suddenly said, and I'm very interested in how much your fortune-telling costs, and how much is not a pity. The fortune-teller cheered up. Christina went to the car, and taking out a smart miniature purse, took out of it a bill of $5. Will that be enough? She asked. To the gypsy. The gypsy hid the money and told the bride to give her her hand. Oh, said the gypsy, I see the success of the money. A house full of money. Christina's mood rose to its highest pitch. Of course, it was only a fortune-telling, but on such a day she wanted to believe only in good things. The groom got out of the car and asked the gypsy, Can you guess something for me too? Why don't you guess, handsome? She smiled gold. A to thee smile. Give me your hand. The fortune-teller looked at James' hand, and suddenly her face turned from swarthy to white. A woman's forehead protruded from Paris. Signals began to sound from the cars behind, but are we going or not? Someone shouted in impatience. Christina heard the angry voice of the new mother-in-law. What are you doing here? Mom, it's okay, James reassured her. And the gypsy woman, taking advantage of the hiccup, whispered to the bride, Run away from this man, and you will be happy with him. I see years of torment, but it's not too late to replay it. I don't understand. I started, Christina, but the fortune-teller was gone. It even seemed to her that there was no gypsy. They drove the rest of the way in silence. Everyone was in their own thoughts. What did she tell you? Kelly asked when the groom had left. Who? Christina didn't understand at first. What about the gypsy girl? It's nothing special. The bride shrugged her shoulders. She decided not to tell her friend about what the fortune-teller had said, as if to say she would start to judge. Like not your man should have chosen properly. But after all, it's just a fortune-teller. Just a fortune-telling. Christina asked herself mockingly, why did you get so excited? Yeah, Kelly couldn't believe it. You weren't wearing your face then. Oh, Kelly, please. Trying to sound cheerful, said the newlyweds. Because of some gypsy. Yeah. What are we talking about? The groom asked with a smile. About love. Kelly replied with a faint chuckle. James was silent. Why talk about it? The witness said approvingly. What is there to talk about? You have to live it. Guys, are you bitter? Bitter and bitter, caught up with the guests. And what about the wedding trip? Perplexed raised her eyebrows Kelly, when on the second day of the wedding, her friend told her that on Tuesday goes to get a job. Sen, well, what wedding trip? Christina grinned wryly. James says that there's no need to spend money on nonsense. Oh, James said, Kelly said meaningfully. Then I have no more questions. What's all the fuss and no fight? Fun? Asked Stephen, putting his arm around Kelly's waist. Women's talk, she replied coquettishly, and still asked him, and bring me some champagne. I will, and obeying my lady. He bowed jokingly and went to get champagne. And what was that? Christina inquired. It wasn't. It was love. And who told me to choose well? She picked on her friend. I did. And then I realized that Stephen was the smartest, the most beautiful, but most importantly, the most beloved. It's over, smiled Stephen after hearing Kelly's last words. He handed the ladies each a glass and said fondly, this deserves to be encouraged with a strong kiss. Christina looked at the lovers and felt sad for some reason. But no, hanging around in rented apartments is not for me. James shook his head. When had Christina suggested renting? Why would she? Mom had offered to live with them. That's true. It's a big place. There's plenty of room for everyone. Having failed to get her husband's support, Mom sighed heavily. She thought sadly, that's what it's all about. However, it was useless to talk to James about it. And after the scene near the dormitory, which took place shortly before the marriage, Christina and would not dare. After a year of married life, Christina was forced to state that the diagnosis of Mama's boy, set and perceptive Kelly, was correct. Turned out to be correct. As for the little one herself, sitting at the table on her wedding anniversary, she wondered how she had lived under the same roof as Vanessa. She looked at Christina arrogantly, and it didn't escape her parents and brother. "What's going on with you two?" Having had a moment, asked Miranda. "What are you talking about?" Made her daughter surprised eyes. Listening to Vanessa. So everything she didn't do, Christina, was bad. According to her mother-in-law, she couldn't cook, couldn't hold a conversation, looked terrible. She was unrealistic, and by all accounts, didn't suit her unattractive son as a woman. And she was a decent cook, and she could hold a conversation. After all, she worked with people without being naturally beautiful. Christina carefully looked after herself and paid attention to fashion trends. In short, tried to always look at the level, and she succeeded more than once, and Christina was not. But here's the latest. What did you hold a candle to? Kelly jumped when she voiced this claim to her mother-in-law. There was actually not much funny, which Vanessa deduced from. It's very simple. In their 1 year together, the couple has yet to procreate. I don't understand why you're stalling. The mother-in-law was puzzled. When Vanessa first talked about it, Christina said that she and James are not yet ready to become parents. And that was true until Christina had just started living. 5 years at the Institute were not easy, and she wanted at least a little bit of a break. That's how Christina perceived her work. Almost immediately after her marriage, she got a job as an editor in a rather successful book publishing house and established herself as a valuable employee. The job meant career advancement, and Christina did not want to miss such an opportunity. And the salary was high. That's a strong argument. What do you mean you're not ready? Splashed hands, mother-in-law. That means the young one thought to herself, your darling, your son, and you are still a child. But out loud she said the first thing that came to mind. It means that I'd like to work at least 1 more year. Well, I'll go on maternity leave. 6 months later at the publishing house. No one will even remember me. It is not a fact that after maternity leave I will return to my old place of work. However, mother-in-law did not care about her daughter-in-law's career. Vanessa did not consider her position serious. What do you think? Some publishing house disdainfully bailed mother-in-law. Talking to her friends. She should have gone to work as a teacher. But who needs her? What can teach a pacifier? For whom the family seems to be an empty sound. Her friends nodded sympathetically. And this inspired a solid woman on a new portion of nasty things to her daughter-in-law about her son's picture. Finger has not struck a finger to prove his readiness to become a father. Vanessa was delicately silent, but self-consciously described what health problems await Christina. Unless, of course, she came to her senses. Yes, none of my classmates has not yet given birth, Christina said. And for nothing, said her mother-in-law admonishingly. Modern ladies, career, career. But why does a woman need a career? After all, her main purpose is motherhood. And let men make careers. Christina only sighed heavily. Her husband was clearly not in the mood for a career. James didn't seem to be in the mood for anything. Otherwise, how to explain his manic passion to change jobs? James never stayed in one place for more than a month. And when asked by his wife, "What's wrong this time?" he just dismissed it as not what I need. And when Christina tried to find out what he needed, he just shrugged. And she had a sneaking suspicion that James was an ordinary bum. Vanessa said the boy was just looking for himself. Christina repeatedly recalled the gypsy woman who had blocked the path of the wedding cortege. When she told Kelly what the fortune teller had whispered to her, she shook her head. You didn't tell me about it then. What would it have been?" Christina grinned. "I wouldn't have had the guts to run away. What would I do? If you needed me, I would have dragged you out of there. What's to say now?" She sighed doomedly. "You don't have to say anything. Anyway, Christina, I'd advise you to get a divorce. I mean, really, what the hell is marriage? I, of course, do not want to interfere in your family life, but in my opinion, you cannot live like this. But don't you want to be truly happy and loved? Yes, I'm sure you would if you wanted to. There'd be a line of people waiting. Maybe, Christina said thoughtfully. But you know, sometimes I feel sorry for James. He's a bit of a loner. Who's going to feel sorry for you? Not Vanessa. So, Christina, I've told you my options, and you do as you please. After talking to her friend, Christina decided to put things into perspective. Kelly's right. No matter which way you look at it, she's right. What was keeping her close to James? The answer was obvious. They weren't ready to be parents, but the truth was, it wasn't just that. Christina was convinced that children should only be born in love. But what kind of love are we talking about? She was reminded of that gypsy girl again. Christina had been thinking of her too often lately. What was that about? Who knows? Maybe Christina would have gotten up the nerve to talk about divorce. But nature decided to play a bad joke on her. One day, sitting at work, she felt sick, and on the advice of one of her colleagues made a pregnancy test. Seeing 2 stripes, Christina almost lost her senses from love. You say babies are being born, she said out loud, not recognizing her own voice, and laughed hysterically. A little calmer Christina began to think feverishly about getting rid of the child. It was out of the question. No, no, and no again. If God gives a baby, it must be born. You've made the right decision. Miranda was serious when Christina told her the news. What if James changed and got more serious about life? Maybe that's why the baby is destined to be born. Mom, I was thinking the same thing, Christina replied and laughed again. This time happily relieved and dreamily added, God willing. We have a normal family. Maybe James will agree to rent an apartment too. To be honest, Miranda had little faith in that. But she couldn't tell her pregnant daughter. And what the hell? And if a miracle happened, her Vidic would come to his senses and stop running from one job to another. Putting down the Finch phone, the eldest looked at her watch. Her husband and son were about to come home from work, and over a delicious dinner, she would inform them of the impending addition to the family. Awesome, Kelly exclaimed. You're going to be a mom, and the rest of this is just a bunch of crap. You're strong, you're self-sufficient. You're gonna make it. Me. Well, your friend replied meekly, although something told her the Scrolls have 2 children to raise. There's already one, but why make a friend nervous when she's in an interesting position? Just ask the Stack to have an educational talk with her friend. Meanwhile, Christina thought about how to inform about her pregnancy to the main culprit. To call or to do it at home. When she was a very young girl, she had imagined many times how she would inform her beloved husband that they were having a baby. Christina dreamed that it would be beautiful and romantic, like in the movies. And then it dawned on her Christina will buy a beautiful Pinard, cook James a romantic dinner, and set the table in the bedroom. And underneath it all she'll tell her husband that now there will be 3 of them and everything will be fine. By the way, there were some preconditions. At the last place of work, James stayed for 4 months, and it was a record. The young woman was so excited about the idea that she wanted to go home early. Christina no longer thought about the fact that they did not live alone, and how many people would feel about it. Dear Vanessa, it was 20 minutes before the end of the day. Actually, she could have closed her office, and she could have gone home without anyone saying a word. But Christina Finch was a sensitive lady. She called the director and only after getting the go-ahead went to the office to get her purse. When Christina was leaving the publishing house, she suddenly saw the same fortune teller Ramella crossing the road and walking straight towards her. Or was it another gypsy woman? Who could tell? They all looked alike. When they crossed each other, Ramella suddenly looked at Christina with a hard stare. The gypsy's gaze was screaming at her to run away before it was too late. She didn't even realize that the fortune teller had said those words aloud. Christina felt uncomfortable. But after a moment, she forgot about the gypsy. There were more important things in her life now. Christina plowed into the apartment, and with a smile, looking at herself in the mirror hanging in the hallway with pleasure, noted that the pregnancy has not yet affected her appearance. The girls at work were frightened by drugstore and pigment stains, But nothing like that. Christina has not matured. Quite the opposite. She had never liked herself so much. A blush played on her cheeks. Her eyes sparkled. "Why are you so cheerful?" muttered the father-in-law with suspicion, looking at his daughter-in-law. So evasively answered Christina and smiled enigmatically. All more she will not give in to any provocation. Now she had to take care of herself for the sake of the baby. Meanwhile, Vanessa was watching TV and thought she had a lover. "There you go." Christina washed her hands and went to her and James' bedroom. "What time will you be there?" Playfully, she asked her husband. "I'm all," James answered, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. There was no such thing as play and flirting in their relationship, but maybe we should try to make it happen. And it was up to Christina, by the way. She is a woman after all. And what were those thoughts in her head? Ironic, thought the mother-to-be. No other way than pregnancy has affected me. Hormones in the head hit everyone. Questioned Christina. "That's good. That's good." James was clearly puzzled, and it made her laugh. "Christina, what's wrong?" "Indecisive?" asked the husband. "But in general, yes," she replied with a smile. "And what is it?" "Let's not talk on the phone." "All right." What was that? James thought, disconnecting some strange voice here, asking what time I'll be there. And that was really something new. Had Christina found out? Frightened, he thought. Well, maybe it's for the best. Especially in my situation. When James first saw Christina, she seemed so defenseless to him. Did James like her? More like no than yes. The girl was hardly beautiful, and she was silent all the time. How do you know what she was like? Maybe she's mute. But here Christina, with a friend strikingly similar to Julia Roberts, came out of the ladies' room, as they like to call the most common toilet. It was like the girl had been replaced. Kelly must have indoctrinated the girlfriend. But he, James, decided to take a closer look at her, and he did. No, she wasn't beautiful, but she had a nice figure. And by the way, she's got taste. About such usually say interesting, spectacular with a twist. But of course, Krupnova is not the right word, but well-matched hairstyle and neat makeup negated this flaw. You can say that the nose was the very highlight. What is enough to remember Barbra Streisand or Kathy? Christina, a girl economic, in addition, serious, without wind in her head. So he should marry her. But his mom is a push-button, and she didn't like her future daughter-in-law right away. "It's like I'm caught between two fires," he complained to his friend Stephen. "I don't understand what's wrong." Surprised, asked the latter. "Go away from your ancestors, and you will be happy." Christina said the same thing, sighed James. "So what's the problem?" "Well, how can I put it?" He hesitated. "I just think it might offend Mom." "Well, gosh darn it." Stephen laughed. "You're inimitable. Unmarried people don't get married and want to move out of their parents' house. And this two-legged man is afraid to offend Mom. Igor, no offense. I respect Vanessa, but I get the feeling she's manipulating you. She doesn't like Christina," James said with a sigh. "But it's more like she's jealous. You're her only son, and here's Christina." "Yeah, not fun," he chuckled. "Hillbilly chick hooks up with a city boy to settle down in the city. That's what your mom says." Stephen guessed it. "Who else would it be?" "But you know," grinned the friend. "Even if Christina was a native of the city from a family of academics or businessmen, it would hardly change anything. Aunt Vanessa would find other arguments against your wife nice, and she doesn't mean that about Christina. She's a self-sufficient girl, so go with the one without a choice." That's easy for James to say. He wasn't used to crossing his mother. Even when Vanessa hurt Christina, he couldn't say anything to her. James berated and shamed himself for it, but he couldn't help it. But he wasn't known for his determination, especially when it came to his mother. And shortly before their wedding anniversary, James met Adriana. This gorgeous, bright, and extraordinary girl turned his life upside down. Adriana was a manager at a private car service center where James had once again taken a job. And it seemed to be love at first sight. That's why he'd been here for 4 months and would probably leave in one single case if the car repair shop went under. Adriana was a vibrant brunette of skin, golden honey-colored, piercing with black eyes, and a stunning figure. One shot of those beautiful eyes and James was blown away. After a week he realized, if this girl wasn't mine, I would get sick and die. So James decided to win her over at all costs from the first advance. He gave Adriana a gorgeous bouquet of roses and unexpectedly invited her to a movie. James told his wife that he was delayed at work due to an urgent order. Young people took places for kissing and, without wasting time, immediately took advantage of it. He remembered going to the movies with his entourage. It was heaven and earth. My God, what I've deprived myself of for 6 whole years. Desperate, James thought. Christina could have been happy. After all, we didn't and don't have any love. From that day on, work was the only place James felt comfortable. It wasn't just work, though. One day, he and Adriana had gone to get some spare parts and ended up at her house. Their passion was at its peak, and it was foolish to deny it. After a frenetic dance of love, they ate store-bought salads and drank juice out of a cardboard box. James imagined how his mother's eyes would have rounded at the sight of such a Snyder and laughed merrily. Plebeian and food would have been carelessly tossed to Vanessa. By the way, that was the one thing she was in solidarity with the socialite Christina on. Thinking of his wife, James gloomed. She doesn't deserve to be deceived by me, he thought. And neither does Adriana. But how do I tell her that I'm married? Adriana asked, noticing the look on his face. Adriana, James began. He took in a chestful of air. And then he stopped talking. I'm listening to you, she smiled. Adriana, I probably should have told you that right away. I really liked you as soon as I saw you, and now I realize it's more than just liking you. I love you, Adriana. And I love you, Adriana replied, looking into his eyes. Hot dates with eating soldiers, which now seemed like James. The most delicious food on Christina continued. It had been almost 4 months, and he still hadn't dared to tell Adriana that he was married. One day James arrived at work, and when he confronted Adriana, she said she didn't want to see him anymore. What's wrong? He asked, although he guessed that James realized that sooner or later Adriana would find out about his marital status. And you're still asking, she confirmed James's assumptions. Adriana's voice was ringing with indignation. How could you? Yesterday my friends and I were sitting in a cafe, and when I showed them your picture, one of the girls recognized you. She works at a book publisher. To be continued. James chose to remain silent. Everything secret sooner or later comes to light. Adriana wrung her hands. Besides, in the age of social media, you can't hide anything. I wanted to tell you, he said humiliatedly. I really did, but you didn't. Anyway, James, it's over between us. I didn't find myself in a dumpster to share you with someone else. The girl nailed him and asked him to leave the office. James was desperate. He wanted to be with Adriana, but he didn't know how to tell Christina. For a whole week, James wasn't himself. Did something happen to you? His mother asked at dinner. No, he answered, glancing at her and then at his wife. Then he added, for good measure, that it was just a hard day at work. Where's Christina? James asked. Was she in your room? Her mother replied with a tight lip and turned away defiantly. Another fight? No, Vanessa shrugged. The son looked at her incredulously, but said nothing. When he entered the bedroom, he was almost speechless. Christina was sitting in a chair, dressed in a pretty lilac stump, and smiled. Hi. Check. Hi. James said in a confused voice. You are so beautiful today. Her husband's confusion amused Christina. Really? She asked flirtatiously. Yes, we have some kind of holiday. Christina got up from the chair and, approaching her husband, put her hands on his shoulders. James, I have something to tell you. But first, she didn't have time to say anything. Vanessa burst unceremoniously into the room. James, are you having dinner? She asked curiously, looking at her son and daughter-in-law. Wait, Mom, James waved her off later. The mother abruptly slammed the bedroom door and defiantly bluntly retreated to the hall and hung onto the boy like a street girl. Quietly, she muttered. Christina fell asleep. Her husband couldn't resist smiling at James either. Really, are you hungry? Tilting her head to the side, the young woman asked. Well, I am. He nodded. It's been fun, Christina said, pointing to a beautiful coffee table server, which James hadn't even noticed from excitement. And what are you going to feed her? Your favorite vegetables, the wife smiled. Oh, James stretched out happily and rubbed his hands together in anticipation of a delicious dinner. And what are you dissatisfied with again? Ethan glanced at his wife with a sidelong glance. That nasty person from the collective farm is hanging on to our son. Ugh. The husband grunted in surprise. Vanessa, do you have a fever by any chance? He asked. He touched his wife's forehead to make sure. Vanessa took offense. You should have seen what kind of robe she was wearing. How? God forgive me. What was that about? Vanessa. Ethan said in a belittling tone. But why do you always look for a catch where there isn't one? It's like you were never young. Come on, defend her. I asked him to dinner. Why would he want his mother's borscht when there's a country courtesan in a robe waiting in the bedroom? The husband only sighed heavily. Delicious, James said approvingly. And that would be all right. But what was the fly that had bitten Christina? And then it hit him. What if she knew about Adriana and me? And now she was trying to keep me away. It was flattering, but something made it hard to believe. Christina's a girl with a pivot, James pondered. And if she really knew something, she wouldn't have held the city back. But then what's the point? What's the point, though? You kind of wanted to say something, he reminded her. I wanted to say something cryptic, Christina smiled. Anyway, James, I'm not going around. Yeah, about me being pregnant. What? Her husband interjected and coughed, almost giving chunks from the beer. James couldn't help but realize that theoretically it wasn't that unrealistic. Even when his and Adriana's affair was in full swing, he had faithfully fulfilled his marital duty. And tender loves and burning passions. Of course, it was out of the question. But there was guilt, and notoriously so, because that's the way it's supposed to be. So that's what it's supposed to be. James' reaction puzzled Christina. He was clearly shocked. Only Christina didn't understand whether her husband was happy or not. She patted James on the back and handed him a glass of mineral water. Thank you, gratefully, said the husband, and added, so I'm going to be a father. Yes, Christina confirmed with a smile. The news of the impending addition to the family didn't seem to upset James, who was thinking, well, that's it. Adriana still doesn't want to see me, and I'm a married man who's going to be a father soon. Christina, well, that's great. He was doing his best to act excited, but Christina couldn't believe it. James, I'm glad. God, would they finally be like other loving couples? Christina remembered today's encounter with the gypsy, and immediately pushed that memory away with annoyance. To hell with it. Euphoric, she thought. James, glad. And the rest is just nonsense. Adriana stared blankly at the 2 red stripes and berated herself. But how could I have been so frivolous? And all the crazy passion that had caught up with her for the first time in 2 years. That was exactly how long it had been since she had broken up with Sasha. Before meeting James, Adriana hadn't graced any guy with her favor. For one thing, she wanted to take a break. And secondly, Adriana wasn't interested in anyone. James reminded her of a defenseless child. It was only later that Adriana realized that was what attracted her to him. And when Adriana found out that her feelings were mutual, she decided James was the man with whom I could be happy and to whom I was ready to give a lot of happiness. The affair was dizzying. Adriana felt like she and James were in the clouds. But how painful was it to fall? What to do, you think? Jean asked. The same friend who worked at the same publishing house as Christina. Give birth. What else? Adriana had terminated her pregnancy a few years ago, when she was a student, a sophomore at Nice. She was sure she would never become a mother again, and berated herself for being a coward. This time, Adriana decided not to tempt fate. She will give birth to this child, and let James live as he knows how. Adriana will not break up the family, much less humiliate herself. I don't want anything from him. You can count on me, Jean said, taking Adriana's hand in hers. I know, she smiled. And thank you very much. You're welcome. When Christina and James informed his parents that they were going to be grandparents, Ethan rejoiced. Well done, he nodded with a smile. God willing, it won't be the last. And Vanessa shook her lips in displeasure and said, Has Her Majesty really done it? What about his career? The career can wait, Christina said nonchalantly. She did not expect any other reaction from her mother-in-law, so she was not offended at all. Come on, you cut the argument short. James and all three of them looked at him in amazement. James decided to show some character. Future fatherhood was clearly good for him. Family life went on as usual. They lived in expectation of an heir, and Christina never ceased to be amazed at the changes in James's behavior. He became more attentive, and it seemed incredibly touching. Ethan, who had behaved quite good-naturedly before. After learning about the pregnancy, his sisters-in-law went to the supermarket and seemed to buy up all the fruit. Vanessa stopped nagging about nothing. Well, thank goodness for that. One evening, Christina got a call from her mother. Christina, would you like to live in the country for a while? Miranda suggested it. Mom's on maternity leave anyway. Yes, I would love to, exclaimed the young woman. What's the need? Dad and I are going to a resort in Thailand. With pride answered the mother and sighed. I would ask Davidka. Does she understand? Christina understood. Her brother David had moved to the neighboring village to his girlfriend and was not an arrogant and terribly jealous person. Sophia had immediately insisted on moving in with her. There was a good and well-maintained house left by her grandmother. It was jealousy and feisty girls to the point of absurdity. Once, when their married life with David was just beginning, and I thought that a young salesgirl was making eyes at him. She's probably not the only one, Sophia said. As the young men left the store, here's the thing, my dear. You will only come here with me. If for some reason I can't make it, you won't go anywhere either. David worked at a service station 24/7, and there was really nothing stopping him from staying with his parents, except for the jealous girlfriend. Since Sophia worked at the local school, she couldn't keep her roommate company. As it happened, her parents had to ask Christina about it. But go, James said after a little thought. I can't work. Yes, I understand, nodded Christina. To tell the truth, the young woman was a little disappointed. She had thought James would say how much he would miss her. Apparently, he just hadn't realized it. Christina reassured herself. James just needed time. Well, why don't you go? He smiled. It's nice in the countryside in winter. The air is so fresh. Will it do you and the baby good? Yes, she smiled back. James, is something wrong? His father asked, looking at him intently. The son, hiding his eyes, sighed heavily. Today he had learned that Adriana was expecting a baby. At first, James thought that the girl he had never forgotten was just getting better. But when rumors spread around the car service that Adriana was going on maternity leave, James physically felt an electric shock run through him. It's his baby. Son, don't be silent, Ethan said. Nothing's wrong. James mumbled uncertainly. I've known you for 28 years, and I can sense the slightest change in your mood. So spit it out, James. And to make it easier for you, let's have a little one. Come on. The son waved his hand. Suddenly, he wanted not just a little drop, but to get drunk. Of course, he realized that the problem wasn't going anywhere, but temporary relief was a good thing. Sometimes, Ethan brought a bottle of his own currants and tincture from the bar. He sliced cheese, ham, and tomatoes, and said to himself and his son in a sedate manner, but it felt good and warm all over his body, and James felt a little better. But said the father, "Tell me what happened." "I don't know where to start, but start somewhere," Ethan grinned. "I fell in love with someone else." "You did?" he exclaimed in amazement. "A long time ago, about 6 months ago. True, we broke up. But if you broke up, what are you talking about?" Father didn't understand. "Then maybe it's not love at all. It can happen. You're an adult. So I'll tell you man to man, I'm not a saint either." "Love," James sighed, ignoring the racy innuendo. "You broke up over what?" "Adriana found out I was married. And recently I found out she was pregnant." "Yeah," the man said thoughtfully. After a moment's silence, he asked, "Are you sure it's yours?" "I'm sure," nodded the son. "Adriana is going on maternity leave, so the timing fits." Yes, the situation stretched Ethan. For the first time in a while, Vanessa was happy to be home. On a gossipy, soul-searching trip with an old pal, she rode the shuttle bus and anticipated. And here was the third night without Christina. Sure, the hated daughter-in-law had only been away in her village for a couple of weeks, but at least she wouldn't have to see that face for a while. James, and where did he find her? Once again, Vanessa thought. She went up to the apartment when she heard the excited voices of her husband and son from the kitchen. Vanessa realized that they were discussing some hot topic over a hot drink. The woman wanted to enter the kitchen and let her know she was coming. But when she heard her daughter-in-law's name, she decided to refrain for the time being. And it seems, for good reason. "What can I advise you?" Vanessa heard her husband's thoughtful voice. "Only to help the child financially, or Adriana doesn't want to see you. While with Christina you are doing well." "Adriana," she marveled. "James has another woman." "Well, that's great. It's a great excuse to kick that redneck out of here. Pregnant. That's a big deal. Alimony's still on the books. Let her go back to her collective farm." It didn't even occur to Vanessa that she might not like her supposed new daughter-in-law either. Her dislike for Christina was truly boundless. "Right, Ethan," said James, "can help the child financially." Vanessa thought approvingly, not even realizing that she was to become a grandmother of 2 grandchildren. "Hello, Eagles," she said cheerfully, swinging open the kitchen door. "And here is our mother," smiled for Camilla of Ethan, and nodding at half a bottle, offered his wife to take from Moro's. "Well, if only from Moro's. What's the occasion of the banquet?" "It's not a banquet." Edifyingly, said the husband, raising up his index finger. "It's a man-to-man talk." "Well, if you're having a man's talk, I won't interrupt you." "Vanessa, come on. I was just kidding." "It's okay," she smiled. Vanessa wanted to dance. To think that her son had finally had an epiphany. She walked out of the kitchen, pulled her cell phone out of her bag, and quickly dialed Anna's number, the same friend she'd just gotten back from. Vanessa was terribly curious about who Adriana was, but she didn't ask her son. Not James, not Ethan. Didn't even realize she'd heard their conversation. Christina was 2 days away from arriving. I wish she hadn't come at all, especially since, as it turned out, Christina had nothing to do here. Well, that could easily be arranged, Vanessa realized. Just pick the right moment and get her out of here. No problem. She heard her son's voice as she passed his bedroom. "I'll meet you there. Just call me when you get into town. I guess James is talking to his wife." Vanessa smiled slyly. Her plan was as simple as genius. It wasn't really a plan, just a little diversion for the good of the family. "Have you talked to Christina?" Vanessa asked her son when he came out of the bedroom, dressed in a bathrobe. "Uh-huh. And when is she coming?" innocently inquired the mother. "She'll be in town tomorrow at 4, but you're at work at that time. So, Christina will call me and I'll meet her." "Mom, I'm going to the bathroom." "If anyone calls, you answer it. Tell them I'll call them back later." "Got it," she nodded, and after waiting until James, from the sound of it, had dipped into the bathroom, she went into their bedroom. Vanessa, furtively, looked around and finally found what she was looking for, a cell phone. Her son had found Christina's number, and she quickly blocked it. Now let her call as much as she likes, thought the treacherous mother-in-law with gloating satisfaction. Not understanding anything perplexed Christina. We had agreed. She had already dialed her husband's phone number 15 times. But James didn't answer. Even if he was very busy at work, he could have texted. Christina pondered. The clock was already showing 4:40. Still no response from James. She bent under the weight of 2 bags with lines, jam and gifts from Thailand, showing cab stands. Girl, why are you pushing such heavy things? I heard a nice male voice in your position. Where does your husband look? Or is there no husband? She wanted to say it's none of his business. A handsome guy, about 27 years old, picked up the bags and asked you to the bus stop. I'd like a cab, answered Christina with a nod, pointing to the parking lot, where a cavalcade of cars with checkers lined up. Reasonably agreed the unexpected assistant. And you know, God himself sent me to you. That's true, laughed Christina, although she was not amused at all. What's the matter? Why isn't James answering? Maybe something's wrong. You don't get it, do you? The guy grinned. I'm just a cab driver. Then God really did send you to me, she agreed. The cab driver asked from the dacha, deftly dumping the bags into the trunk. Why did you think so? Christina asked in surprise. What's so strange about it? She came with groceries, among which you can guess jars of pickles and tomatoes. Usually with all these things come from the village. Christina doesn't look like a student with her almost 8-month belly. The guy's so embarrassed. Just wondering where we're going. Minen Street. I see. The cab driver answered in a cheerful voice and started the engine. On the way they got to talking. The guy's name was Mason. And what's your name? Beauty? He asked with a smile. Christina shyly, she answered. Talking to a strange man made her a little embarrassed. Nice to meet you, Christina. I hope they will meet you at the entrance. I don't know, sighed the young woman. Her husband promised to come and didn't. Mason guessed. No, he called and didn't answer. I'm afraid something might happen. But let's hope for the best. I wish, sighed Christina. When they pulled up, the young woman dialed James' number again. There was no answer. The cab driver asked sympathetically. She shook her head. Let me help you carry the bags. The services of a rapist are free of charge. Mason couldn't help but smile. But Christina, let's say goodbye, said Mason at the door. The guy's voice sounded sad. It made her feel uncomfortable. Christina started to open the door, but it suddenly swung open. Surprised, Vanessa said angrily, actually the mother-in-law should be at work. Christina suddenly had a bad feeling. Did something really happen? Vanessa, honey, is something wrong? She exclaimed. How cute I am, she hissed. But you got that right, something's wrong. Something's wrong with James. Christina asked fearfully, deciding to ignore the tone. Vanessa, it wouldn't hurt to find out what happened first. It's just that I called him many times, and he doesn't answer. Her mother-in-law interrupted her impolitely and laughed deafeningly. Don't wait up. What's the matter? Christina couldn't stand it. She had already realized that nothing terrible had happened to her husband. James had finally come to his senses. Vanessa proclaimed triumphantly. He's in love with another woman. No match for you and ideas without looking back. There's nothing more for you to do here. James has blacklisted you. Don't you realize you're no match for my son? Go and get your stinking Solomina. I don't want to talk to you anymore. But James and I just talked yesterday, and he promised to meet me. Christina said incredulously. Look, you're a country cow. And the fact that you were blocked without explanation is not an argument. The mother-in-law got angry. Christina couldn't believe what her mother-in-law was saying. Yeah, but James' cell phone really wasn't answering. In that amount of time, he could have seen her calls, or at least missed calls, more than once. Besides, knowing James's indecisive nature, It could be assumed that the hubby had chickened out. Christina didn't want to believe it, but everything pointed that way. "Still, I'd like to talk to James," she said firmly. "Even if it is as you say, I want to look him in the eye." "You want to do what you want," Vanessa shouted in her sister-in-law's face. Stepping on her, she pushed Christina in the shoulder. She lost her balance, swung her arms awkwardly, and tumbled down the stairs. "Oh God," the woman said in horror. "But I didn't mean to do it." She did. "What's going on here?" the upstairs neighbor asked. The man was coming downstairs and seeing Christina lying between the floors, turned pale, and she herself, as if in delirium, repeated Vanessa. She really didn't want to. "What's the matter with the girl?" the man bellowed. "She's herself, Vanessa." The neighbor above, whose name was Jacob, approached Christina and, making sure she was alive, yelled at the woman. "What are you standing there for? Call an ambulance. She's on her own." The neighbor had his doubts about that. He had heard Vanessa scold his sister-in-law more than once and had probably pushed her down the stairs. Perhaps it was unintentional. But either way, the young woman needed medical attention. Taking a closer look at the neighbor, Jacob realized she was in shock and took matters into his own hands. The man took his cell phone out of his pocket and promptly called an ambulance. "Be patient, sweetheart," the man coaxed. He really liked this interesting young woman. What can't be said for the slimy neighbor? Had Ethan been lucky enough to marry that girder? Jacob thought. But there was nothing to be done. Vanessa was still in a state of shock, and therefore she too needed medical attention. The ambulance arrived about 10 minutes later. The doctors loaded Christina into the car, and the remaining doctor asked the concerned neighbor, with whom Vanessa lives, her husband, her son, and the young woman who was taken away. "You can contact them. There's no point in taking the woman to hospital, but you shouldn't leave one behind." The door to the apartment was open, and Jacob helped the doctor usher Vanessa into the apartment. She herself repeated the woman as if wound up. "So, can you contact the husband or the son?" The doctor repeated his question. "Yes, of course," nodded the neighbor. "I have Ethan's number," where I was singing Christina in a weak voice. Slowly spilled into my eyes. In the hospital she heard a voice, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a man in a white coat. "How am I here? Did your neighbor call for an ambulance?" Christina remembered what had happened, and her face turned as pale as chalk. "What's wrong with my baby?" she asked. "Christina Vladimirovna, you now need to rest, sleep, and then we will talk to you." "What's wrong with my child?" persistently said the young woman. "I'm very sorry," the doctor replied. The baby could not be saved. Christina turned her back to the wall and sobbed bitterly. The next day, James came to see her. "Christina, I am very sorry," he said gently. "Sorry?" Christina grinned mockingly. "What about the woman of your dreams?" "What woman?" "You know, the one who's not like me. Like your mom said before." Her lips quivered. "What the hell is this?" James exclaimed. "Her mom doesn't know her." When he realized he'd made a mistake, he fell silent and then spoke awkwardly. I was going to say." "Don't," James with a sad smile, and shook his head. "Christina, if you really loved another woman, then run to her and make her happy. And of course, be happy yourself." "Christina, you are extraordinary," quietly said the husband. "Thank you, and you be happy too." "I will try." Christina nodded, and tears appeared in her eyes. "But run along, and when I'm better, we'll get a divorce." When James went to see his now almost ex-wife, he was in the mood for a difficult conversation. But it went well. "Christina's great," he thought on his way to the bus stop. He had to get to work. But first, James would go to a few places. The prices at the jewelry store were touching, but James didn't mind. He'd gotten his paycheck the other day and had barely spent it. James' attention was drawn to a gold ring with a rich framing of tiny diamonds, just right for the color of Lenny's eyes. He thought enthusiastically and without hesitation bought the ring. You have excellent taste in simple metal young, spectacular blonde. Come again. Do you want it for a gift? Or do you have some other occasion? The pretty flower girl asked with a smile. Today I'm proposing to the best girl on Christina, James announced solemnly. What are roses then? The girl nodded understandingly. Pay attention to these dark red ones. The saints were indeed a miracle how good the petals of piercing dark scarlet color seemed velvet. Fragrance. I wonder what Garden of Eden they grow in, James thought. The main thing is not to lose the romantic mood. When James arrived at work, the first thing he did was to run to Adriana's office. The colleagues looked at each other meaningfully. And you are the one who indifferently threw Adriana. She was packing, and she clearly did not care about James. It's nothing that can be easily remedied. At least, that's what he hoped. Yes, that's me, said James decisively, handing her the roses and getting down on one knee. Adriana, I love you and I want to be with you. She wanted to say something, and it was something that James obviously didn't like, so he immediately took matters into his own hands. Adriana, sweetheart, my darling, I know what you're going to say. Yes, I'm married, but now it's just a matter of weeks. Christina and I are getting a divorce, and as you can see, there's nothing stopping us from being together. Adriana, marry me. In one breath, James blurted out and took out a velvet box from his pocket and handed it to his beloved. From the side of the entrance, a great applause was heard. Verka, say yes. Someone shouted. Yes, quietly said the happy bride and laughingly added, getting up from her knees. Hero lover. James obey. He approached Adriana and gently stroked her belly. He whispered, do you know who we are going to have? She whispered back, we're having a girl. A month later, the lovers signed. And another month later, they had a baby girl whom they named Christina. I hope you won't be jealous. James asked. If you don't mind. I don't mind. His wife shook her head with a smile. Personally, I think of your ex as a kind of Cupid. The newly minted young father laughed. I wonder how Christina would feel about such a comparison. Cupid. After the divorce, Christina plunged headlong into work. Thank God, she and James parted peacefully, you could say friends. After maternity leave and divorce, the first thing Christina did was freshen up her hair and update her closet. You're gorgeous, Kelly said enthusiastically. Divorce has obviously been good for you. Trust me, you won't be alone for long. You know, Kelly, I've decided to take it slow. Like you said, we have to choose. The friends laughed merrily. Christina, to you another talent, announced Secretary Veroshka. Let her come in. She nodded wistfully, imagining a conversation with the next graphomaniac, which are scattered like mushrooms after the rain. When the visitor came and Christina was dead, standing in front of her was Mason, the cab driver, the same cabbie who'd driven her away that day when, well, don't mention the sad part. Christina, Mason, they said each other's names in sync and laughed merrily. Let's see what you got. Christina switched to a businesslike tone. I'm writing poetry. Don't laugh. Why would I laugh? It's my job. Mason's poems, though simple and uncomplicated, ran to the goosebumps. As you got into the cab, did you smile, or was it just me? When Christina read these lines, she felt herself blushing. It didn't take much intelligence to realize who these poems were about. Not bad. Not bad at all. She nodded approvingly and repeated the last line, but unfortunately not fluently. Christina, Mason, you have the wrong information. Unexpectedly, she said. What are you talking about? He didn't get it. Christina mumbled embarrassedly, thinking, what am I doing? It's just that my husband and I divorced 2 months ago. I'm sorry, said Mason. Though in fact roses, tulips, and other fauna slowly but surely began to bloom in his soul. There is nothing to be sorry about. Christina waved his hand. Our marriage was doomed from the beginning. Oh, I'm sorry. Why? Surprised cab driver. The poet was just being frank. Well, sometimes people need to talk, he said. Christina, yes. Would it be impertinent of me to invite you to a cafe? Why not? Christina smiled. Mason was easy and fun. The young people switched to the first name. After that, it seemed to both of them that they knew each other for 1,000 years. How long have you been writing poetry? Asked Christina. Since high school, answered Mason. Be honest. My poems have a chance of being recognized. How can I put it? To be honest, poems as such are not in trend right now. But they're good for Toastmasters greeting cards and stuff like that. Well, thank you for your candor. After the cafe, Mason took Christina to the apartment she rented after the divorce. You can come in, she offered. I have very tasty tea, but raspberry and currant flowers with lemon are cosmos. After the tea ceremony, Mason left, and Christina grabbed her phone. Kelly, I think I'm in love, she declared. I think, no, you don't. I'm in love, and I think I'm in love for good. But love that is, I hope, a mutual declaration of love has not sounded. Christina replied in a low voice. Oh, Kelly, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? By the way, what's his name? Mason. Well, either you and Mason are gonna have something or you're not. There's no three ways about it. That's not optimistic, more like realistic, and it's pretty much up to you. Remember that night at the coffee shop with the wall and James? So what? And the fact that then you did it all. And if you want, it will work out, and this time, said her friend. The past year had been eventful. No sooner had the wedding of Stephen and Kelly rumbled off. David told his sister he was getting married. Don't tell me you're marrying Sophia. Christina was horrified. I won't, laughed her brother, because I'm marrying Sophia. My fiancée's name is Evelyn, and I'll bet you'll like her. Evelyn really did like her a lot. But most importantly, Christina caught the bride's bouquet. Looks like I can't get out of this one. Mason jokingly waved his hands and promised to come back to this conversation, which he did a week later. It's like a wedding boom, Kelly said with a smile. Although we have Stephen, and the other news is science, science, science. We're having a baby. Congratulations, Christina exclaimed. This is really great news. And a month after the wedding, Christina proudly informed Mason that they too would become parents. The baby was sleeping serenely and advised touchingly. Christina opened Messenger and ran through the congratulations with a smile. She received congratulations from her brother and son, Hihi's parents, from aunt, colleagues, classmates, and even from her ex-husband and his Adriana. And Rick opened his blue milky eyes and poked the phone at that time. Sweetheart, come to the window, read the message. Well, shall we go meet Daddy? Gently whispered Christina and went to the window. The happy young father stood in the courtyard of the maternity hospital with a bouquet of roses and a bunch of balloons. On the biggest balloon it was written, "Thank you for your son," and the happy young mother held her baby in her arms and looked at her husband with a smile. Tears of happiness were flowing down her cheeks. Subscribe and click the bell.
I can't believe that such a young person is really as highly qualified as the references and diploma say. I am confused about your age. The future boss repeated this phrase several times in the last hour. The dialogue could have been called an interview, but it was more like an interrogation. Sitting at the oak table, a man in his 40s had already asked about 1,000 questions. He was not interested in simple, unambiguous answers. Max was interested in details. It seemed that he knew more about the girl than she knew at the moment when she crossed the threshold of the office and timidly said hello. Employers cared about all, even the smallest details of her life. Where and at what faculty she studied full-time or part-time, what grade she got, and whether the teachers appreciated the girl. The man clarified and wrote down in the diary the names of all the relatives Christina could name. He found out where she already worked and for what reasons she was fired, and also her attitude to pets and vaccinations. The only thing the man really didn't care about: references from past jobs. He stated that the former employer could write anything he wanted on the paper and not even have to thank him for it. It was just a paper that would not determine whether Christina would get a position as a caregiver or be left with nothing again. However, the man scrutinized the documents and then put them in a folder, pushed them aside, and looked at her carefully in the eyes. "Better tell me, beautiful child, why were you fired from your last job?" His gaze expressed complete distrust towards the girl. With every word, he wanted to catch her in a lie or point out her disreputable behavior. Christina sat across from this gullible man on the leather couch and wondered if she should continue the interview at all. She felt as if she were not applying for a position as a nurse for a sick old lady, but as if she were about to become an ambassador who would have access to state secrets. In spite of everything, neither fatigue nor the desire to get home and take a hot bath, Christina held herself with dignity. She politely answered her future employer's numerous questions and showed him impeccable patience and restraint. As a rule, this is how they want to see a person who will have to care for an elderly woman with a strong character. It is possible to understand employers in such a case. It is nice to realize that the nurse at the moment when her ward will show caprices and refuse to eat, will not put a pot on the head of an insane babka and will not knock on it to the colonels, but will only smile and continue with entreaties and tales to feed her from a spoon. For Christina, this kind of activity was not new. She had previously had the honor of watching over the elderly parents of wealthy people. Despite the fact that each of her wards was with its own complex character and certain requirements, today's potential boss pissed the girl off. And this despite the fact that in the first minutes Christina even experienced a slight sympathy for him. Max was really handsome, muscular body, swarthy skin, rough masculine chin and full lips. All of this couldn't help but attract the girl's attention. Looking into his eyes, she seemed to drown. They were blacker than night, and surely ruined a large number of representatives of the opposite sex. It was enough only once to look at him, and it became clear that the girl disappeared. Even under his jacket, his broad shoulders, powerful arms and muscles were noticeable. Really, you're right, Christina couldn't stand it. I'm really too young for such a high qualification. The girl began to rise slowly from the sofa. I think we will come back to this conversation in 10 years. Then I will be old enough to meet your expectations. Christina in no way expected to hear his commanding tone. Max said loudly, "Sit down." Despite the fact that he was still not considered the girl's superior and had no right to raise his voice at her, she didn't dare disobey. There was something in his voice. What made Christina obey? She instantly sat back down on the couch and thought about the fact that with that kind of grip, he could command an army instead of casting sit-ins for his elderly mother. He looked the girl straight in the eye and said, "Do you really think I'm asking stupid questions?" Max swept the hall with his impossible eyes. It was quite difficult to bear their gaze. The girl did not want to lie. She wished to remain extremely honest with him, but she could not, and slowly said, "I suppose you have good reasons for that. I don't think it's out of idle curiosity. My mom's coming to stay with me for 3 months. She just got out of rehab, so she won't be able to stay home alone. She'll need a lot of attention and your patience. To be honest with you, she's not the best temperament." Max was silent for a few minutes. Then he turned to the window and thought hard. He continued as if he were talking to himself. "We haven't spent time together for a long time. My mother has been separated for over a year. Ever since her second husband died. I'd like to spend as much time with her as possible. But my profession requires full commitment. If I stop devoting time to work, I'll have to support my mother and fulfill her whims. I simply won't have the financial ability." His eyes were full of coldness. When Max took his gaze away from the window and looked at Christina again. "And believe me, if I have to ask stupid questions for hours just to find the right person, I will do it." At this point, the girl had the very plausible opinion that Max was used to torturing those willing to work for him. But he had found a nurse who was not timid. This girl would never let anyone treat her like this. She knew what humiliation and disrespect were, and so she had made a promise to herself that she would never let anyone feel that way about her. The girl grew up in an orphanage. She was an orphan and had no idea who her parents were. The educator told that mom and dad loved their daughter very much, but they had to fly far away to a star, It was from there that they watched Christina and were proud of her. Frankly speaking, there was nothing to be proud of especially. The girl from time to time attended classes at the university and changed one job for another. The only thing she was really good at was taking care of the elderly. They reached out to her and were ready to fulfill any requirements of doctors, but only under Christina's constant supervision. Several of her charges had already died. They were too old and learned. It fell to the girl to watch over them before they died. Christina was confident that she would easily find a common language with Max's mother. That is why, as soon as the information about the vacancy arrived, she, without hesitation, went to the interview. But now her patience was wearing thin. "Excuse me, Max," calmly said the girl, addressing the failed employer. "I'm sorry I'm not the right person for your mother's care. I can't waste any more time answering your many questions. I can't take another couple hours. It's not worth wasting your time. Not yours, not mine." With these words, the girl quickly got up from the couch. I can imagine what a beating she will get from the head of the agency, who gave excellent recommendations and sent her here. Lucy would have easily sent a more experienced and qualified girl to this position, but she gave her a chance. She repeatedly told Christina that she saw potential in her and wanted to help her realize it by all means. But Christina once again failed to live up to the expectations of her older comrade. It is very good to be beautiful, but only if you do not plan to get a servant in a rich house as a nanny, maid, nurse, or housekeeper. And for those who are going to get such a position, beauty becomes an incredible disadvantage. Potential employers are weeded out during the interview process. Rich men treat such girls with great enthusiasm. But the bigger it is, the higher the risk that their wives will definitely refuse to hire them. It is better to be a middle-aged gray mouse from an intelligent family. Young and not-so-gray girls are not in fashion today. And to this, Max Lucy directed Christina not only because she wanted to help, he is lonely. And therefore, when hired, no beautiful lady will not sit next to her and give valuable advice. The decision on whether the girl would follow his mother would be made only by Max. But there was no point in pondering about it anymore. The girl had missed another chance to get a job. The only consolation for Christina was that she understood why Max was lonely. Anyone would just run away from him to the ends of the earth. Because living with a bore is a difficult enough ordeal, and even good looks and a piercing gaze can't change that. Christina quickly left the territory of the mansion and sat down in a cab. Sadly, she thought about the fact that such luxury will have to forget about it if she can't find a job in the near future. She would even have to give up taking buses and walk. She was in no hurry to tell Lucy that she had failed. That news would have to wait until tomorrow. Besides, no one was kicking her out. Christina left the rich house on her own. The girl was already near her own house when a message came on her phone. Max wrote that she was hired and already tomorrow she could arrive by 9 o'clock. She had to go through the registration procedure and receive detailed instructions. The boss's mother should arrive the day after tomorrow. She entered the mansion at 8:55. An earlier arrival would mean that Christina had voluntarily condemned herself to languish in front of her employer's office, showing undue interest. Being late would be even worse. Max would hardly want to deal with an unpunctual person who does not know how to calculate her own time. These are not qualities that would be worth mentioning in a resume and showing the boss on the first day to come 5 minutes early. Ideal solution. This period of time is enough time to gather your thoughts and put yourself in order if the need arises. Christina's experience in attending job interviews was so rich that she could write a book on how to behave properly to get a job. But she didn't use her knowledge herself for some reason. The door to Max's office was open, for better or worse. Whenever Christina had to knock on a closed door, she felt inexplicably awkward and could not cope with the feeling. Asking the question would do the trick. She was always terrified to hear an angry voice from behind the door, informing her that it was busy or that she had to close the door immediately. This is exactly what the teachers in the orphanage where the girl grew up did. It affected her fragile psyche and took its toll. It was noticeable that Max did not like to waste time. Despite the early hour, work was in full swing. And if in large companies by 9 o'clock employees only come to work and spend another hour to drink coffee with colleagues and wake up. In Max's case, it was different. It seemed that the work in his office never stopped. Since yesterday, from behind the door could be heard thundering and rolling of his voice. He was giving orders, at the same time pointing out mistakes and explaining what they led to. Most likely it was a telephone conversation, because there was no one in the office except Max. Christina realized that it was 8:59 on the clock. She should show herself on the doorstep of the office and draw attention to herself. Let Max see that she was not late, but arrived exactly at the appointed time. However, as soon as the girl made a step towards the door, she heard a woman's voice, and it came from the office. "Max, Bunny, are you wrong now?" From what she heard, the girl froze in shock, least of all Max. A stone impenetrable wall. He looked like a bunny, unless he was hiding in his closet or under his desk. Another Max. On autopilot, Christina took another short step and glanced fleetingly through the open door. No, there were two of them. A supervisor sat behind a desk, opening and closing a ballpoint pen. And next to him stood a tall, beautiful girl in a strong business suit. "You know how long it took me to get this contract for us?" The pretty girl in the skirts seemed to be indignant. She waved a pile of some papers in front of Max's face. "Now what? Now you turn your nose up. I agree. These guys may not be perfect, but who can boast of that quality?" Christina's greatest wish at this moment was to turn invisible. The scene, which she witnessed quite by accident, was clearly not meant for unauthorized viewers. The intimate bunny alone was worth what? The girl had the feeling that she had stumbled into someone else's bedroom without knocking and caught the couple in the middle of a not-so-applicable activity. Actually, it was their own fault. You shouldn't leave the door open. Anyone passing by here could quite unwittingly become a spectator of what was going on. Christina backed away from the office door, farther away, turned the corner, and took a breath. This morning, going to a new job, she did not plan to become a witness to an incomprehensible scene. The girl still couldn't decide what she had just seen. Whether it was a conflict of interest at work, or a quarrel between two lovers, or all together. Christina felt sincere joy not only from the fact that she had remained unnoticed, but also for the reason that her ward would arrive at her son's house only tomorrow. Old people tend to appear unexpectedly and at the most inopportune moment. And then, as if nothing had happened, to interfere in what is happening and give out valuable advice. If Max's mother were here right now, she'd probably ask, "What are you doing here? Nice ladies hiding from your boss or eavesdropping on these?" Christina immediately imagined this picture and a couple of faces from the office that would immediately turn in her direction and make such an expression that Christina involuntarily wanted to fall onto the ground. Try to tell and prove to anyone that it wasn't espionage, but a simple coincidence. No, she'd rather let what she'd seen and heard be her own little secret. The couple in the study were talking so loudly that the voices carried even into the hallway. However, it was hard to understand what they were talking about. Only one thing was clear: Max spoke in a calm, cold voice, and his interlocutor was constantly snapping and could not control her own emotions. "You're acting like an idiot. My bunny. Only a fool can afford to refuse such a lucrative offer." There was a rustling of papers. It was clear that the businesswoman was again showing him the papers lying on the table, considering it a weighty proof of her own rightness. Time was passing, and the hand of the watch, which was worn on Christina's wrist, came to the very top. However, the unfamiliar girl from Max's office did not even think to end either her monologue or not the most successful dialogue in her life. Christina didn't really want to interfere in a conversation filled with bunnies and goofs, but she realized that Max might think that the girl was late today, and therefore would be late all the time. Today it was especially important for the new caregiver to make a good impression on her boss. What was that involved? The girl didn't know yet, but she didn't see it as a big deal. He was just an employer, on whose decision depended whether she would get the job and the salary or not. At exactly 9 o'clock, Christina heard the voice of her boss. He clearly said that the meeting was over and would continue next time. Max explained to his interlocutor that now he had an important meeting, and therefore the person in the strong suit would have to leave his office. Most likely, The man had already gone to the door. Christina could make out every word he said. She could not believe her happiness. The boss turned out to be punctual, so what if he was a bore? This too has its advantages. However, the girl continued to bend her line. All you have to do is sign the papers. Come on, you fool, sign it. And we'll make the evening just for the two of us. It's like she's stretching her words on purpose. I've already told you firmly no, this deal is off. And besides, I'm very busy tonight. The girl, resentfully muttering something under her nose, flew out of the office and ran past Christina. Despite her speed, she managed to run her gaze distractedly over her. Only when she had already flown across the hall did she stop and quickly turn around. From the outside, it seemed that the information the stylish lady had gotten while running had just reached her brain. The business lady gave Christina a hard stare. No one even tried to hide dislike and surprise. The new nurse did not pretend not to notice the interest in her, but even nodded to her boss's business partner as a sign of greeting. She was particularly interested in who could afford to call Max a bunny and a fool at the same time. Christina assumed that they would often have to run into each other within the walls of this house, and therefore it was better to prepare for these meetings. The boss's supposed girlfriend looked dignified. The first thought that crossed Christina's mind was the realization that this is a rather expensive person. It would hardly look luxurious now, shower her with gold and diamonds. A strict suit sat perfectly on her slender figure, and stiletto-heeled loafers emphasized the beauty and length of her legs. The small jewelry would have gone completely unnoticed, but it emitted such a bright glow that it seemed to outshine the light of the lamps. Looking at her sleek black hair, Christina suddenly remembered the warlike Indians. The girl was very pretty, but not very friendly. She did not think of answering Christina's greeting. The business lady's face remained impassive and fearless. Just as abruptly as she had just stopped, the girl turned around and slammed the door loudly. Despite the fact that the appearance of this one especially had perfect upbringing was absent there. Christina could tell that as a professional nanny or caregiver. Never. A man who solves business issues by acquiring bunnies shouldn't get his nose above his own head. Christina's musings were interrupted by the voice of her boss. "Come in, my dear young lady." It was a pity that he saw her. It would have been much easier if Max didn't know that someone had unwittingly witnessed his conversation with the business lady. One good thing. He now knows that the nurse came strictly at the appointed time, not late and disrespectful. On the sea to life, Max watched carefully as Christina entered the office and took a seat on the couch. Looking at his face, it was hard to imagine that just a minute ago passions were raging here. He seemed indifferent, unperturbed, cold, and powerful, trying not to give away the shyness that had appeared from some unknown source. Christina said hello. Max answered her and pointed to the table that stood near his desk. He waited patiently for the girl to get up from the couch and move closer. "Max spoke before you, and I signed the documents. I would like to make it clear, if you even once again allow yourself to get up and walk out without listening to me to the end, like you did in the interview, we're going to have to break up. I'm the only one making the decision here. When will this conversation be over?" "That's understandable." He looked her straight in the eye without hesitation. Christina realized she wasn't mistaken. Her boss was not only a terrible bore, but also a tyrant. She realized that no position, even the most prestigious one, was worth it if someone could afford to talk like that. Better to walk and starve. She was about to open her mouth to say all the thoughts that were whirling through her head. But when she looked into his eyes, she could only shyly apologize. Max nodded approvingly, signaling that the subject was closed, and just as coldly offered again to discuss all the terms of cooperation. The man listed the responsibilities of the caregiver and named the amount of monthly payments he would receive. Christina takes care of his mother. The sum exceeded any expectations of the girl. She tried her best to hide her unexpected joy. It would look unseemly and certainly unprofessional. Max would hardly be pleased. Finding out that his mother's new caregiver had once slaved for pennies, Christina quickly put a neat little signature on the proposed documents. An attentive person could recognize a lot from the handwriting for what it was. She was completely at ease. Smooth, neat lines could only give away the girl's poise, collectedness, and integrity. Well, now it was time to familiarize himself with Helen's schedule. For the first time ever, a note of uncertainty and doubt slipped into his intonation. Why it happened became clear in a few seconds. A heavy folder appeared on the table in front of Christina. Max offered to familiarize himself with the papers and allowed to ask questions if necessary. Frankly speaking, the girl was afraid to seem overly curious. After she had received the first beating from her boss, she decided that she would just read everything she was given and do without another dialogue. But she couldn't fulfill the promise she'd made to herself. When she opened the first sheet, she immediately raised her head and looked at her boss with surprised eyes. "Your mother speaks Chinese. Do not be surprised, Christina. It was promising in the years of her youth and the profession obliged. But today it's hard enough for her to give up her old habits. Now more than half the world speaks the language, and she doesn't want to be left behind. Don't worry, you can talk to her in English. All you have to do is take her to a tutor." Christina went back to reading, and as she turned the pages, she felt more and more pity for her ward. Her day was scheduled almost minute by minute. The girl's introduction. Old age is when you sit in a rocking chair by the plate, watch TV, and occasionally solve crossword puzzles, and not spend the only free minutes to say goodbye to one teacher and get to the next. The girl's imagination had already painted the face of a sad old woman who was being forced to attend classes to keep her sanity. However, she had no idea what an active woman she was to meet. Helen was burning with the desire to live and could not imagine that she would sit at home and watch Malakov's show on TV. While Christina was carefully reading all the documents that were in the folder, Max was silently watching her. It seemed that he was trying to read the girl's thoughts and look into her soul. The man nodded impatiently with his pencil and the desk top of his desk. Once the girl had read everything that was presented to her, she decided that she could make her own point. "Do you really think all this is necessary for a woman of her age who has undergone a major operation?" The pencil with which he was beating out the rhythm flew sharply to the other side of the table. He looked at Christina with an annihilating look and said, "Her daughter needs this." Christina and her new boss went to meet Helen at the airport. The car was driven, of course, not by Max, but by his driver, a mature, respectable man who seemed to be fused to the steering wheel and paid no attention to anything but what was happening on the road. Max's mother was returning today from a clinic in Germany. There she had undergone heart surgery and spent several weeks in rehab. As soon as Max got in the car and buckled up, he was instantly engrossed in his laptop and completely immersed in his work. He wasn't interested in how long their drive was or if they would make it in time for the plane to arrive. All the most important things were happening on his computer right now. Looking at the expression on his face, Christina decided that her boss was checking the morning mail or solving a problem of incredible proportions. However, she did not rule out the possibility that he might be corresponding with the person who had loudly called him a fool and an idiot yesterday morning. Max was so fascinated by what was happening on the other side of the screen that he never once took his eyes off it. He continued to work while they sat in the waiting room at the airport. The computer was turned off only when the arrival of the flight on which his mother was arriving was announced, and the hall began to fill up, with people waiting and meeting. Then the man finally turned off his laptop and put it in his bag. His cold face trembled and moved as the doors began to open and the passengers of the arriving flight appeared in the hall. Christina could not believe her eyes. Could this unapproachable man of stone really smile? She carefully followed his gaze and saw that a rather busy couple appeared on the horizon. A pumped-up man in dorm mooring jeans, which seemed to tear from the slightest movement, and a girl in a t-shirt with a smiling kitten drawn on it. Following them came a wheelchair. There was no doubt who sat in it. Black eyes shone half a face the same as Max's. Christina correctly assumed it was her boss's mother. And in front of her walked her daughter and her boyfriend. "Son," the woman shouted loudly, finding Max with her eyes. She even seemed to be bouncing in her chair with impatience. It must be said that she loved her son very much, and he reciprocated. There was an invisible bond between them, which is rarely preserved between children and parents. "Who is that with her?" Christina asked. She wanted to see if her hunch was correct or if she was wrong. That's my little sister Maria. Cervantes is always looking for adventure, not only for herself, but also for others. That's why Mom has such a busy schedule. Maria is sure that if you just let her relax, Mom will go crazy and will bore everyone with her moralizing and simple boring. Max answered the new caregiver's question exhaustively. Christina noted that the phrase about boring was just right. By the way, if this quality was possessed by Helen's son, I see from whom it was passed on. Meanwhile, Helen said something angrily to her son-in-law. The expression on her face accurately conveyed any emotion. Therefore, it was easy to guess that the woman was angry. However, the man didn't even turn a deaf ear. He continued to walk confidently toward his lover's brother. Angry at the lack of attention, Helen pulled something from her pocket that looked distantly like a remote control. She easily pressed the button and smiled. It didn't take long for the people around her to react. The suitcase that Alex, Max's sister's boyfriend, was carrying started to move. It vibrated and shook, bouncing, snapping. It was as if inside it had just come to life. Something big and strong. Or something. From surprise, people scrambled from the side, looking around in confusion and just in case, trying to get away from the suspicious suitcase, and at the same time from the man who was carrying it. The strong, muscular man frowned and looked at his mother-in-law with a slight reproach. There's a reason they say old people are like children. Alex and Max looked at each other quickly and nodded satisfactorily. It seemed that only Christina did not understand what was happening and where she had gotten to. Someone from among the passengers and greeters loudly shouted terrorists, and panic left the whole hall. Some called the police. Others grabbed the children in their arms and rushed to the exit. 2 policemen on duty were rushing towards Alex. On the way, they even forgot their breakfast and grabbed the holster quite in the side of the neck. Calmly, in a loud voice, said Alex. To be honest, his voice, thick bass, which would be envied by the most famous opera singer, was clearly not intended to inspire calmness and confidence in the surrounding. As expected, the panic only grew larger around the man with the suitcase. Abruptly, an empty space was formed. In the hall where the people from the airplane had just entered. It was hard to imagine such a thing. People were trying to run as far away as possible, and those who had not yet had time to leave the plane crowded at the doors and caused the formation of a real jam. Those who had already entered the hall, expectations with horror rolled backwards, and the rear ones, not understanding what was happening and why they were not allowed into the hall, on the contrary, strived forward. It seemed that only a second had passed, but Helen was not next to Alex. She could be in danger because the woman was in a wheelchair and could not stand up for herself. However, Max was surprisingly calm. Everything seemed to be going according to his plan, and he was even enjoying himself. The man did his best to keep an indifferent expression on his face, but the corners of his lips treacherously turned upward. It was enough to realize that what was happening in the hall gave him incredible pleasure. His eyes were filled with pride. Yes, it was pride. Christina shook her head fearfully, trying to push away the thought that her new boss was not only a bore and a tyrant, but also a madman. "Where is your mother, Max?" Christina tried her best to shout out the crowd in the waiting room and draw attention to herself. But her boss didn't even turn a deaf ear. Of course, a stone wall would not pay attention to a mere nurse. Meanwhile, the situation with the suitcase, inside of which seemed to live something big, stronger, and more frequent, developed quite rapidly. Realizing that in order to calm the crowd, the only thing left to do was to open the suitcase and show the contents to those around him. Alex did exactly that, and it didn't bother him at all that his mother-in-law's power of attorney had disappeared somewhere. He lowered the bag on the floor and only touched the lock, as everyone heard a hysterical scream. The man didn't pay any attention to those around him. He just pulled the zipper. And that's when the suitcase on the floor really exploded. Multicolored things flew out of it, dresses and sweaters, handkerchiefs and plates. Expensive clothes bought by Helen during the whole time of her stay in Germany. It should be noted that before the scheduled surgery, she had the opportunity not only to visit expensive brand stores, but also to buy things from the latest collections of famous designers. Her son never spared money for his mother and always fulfilled any of her whims. A turquoise Panama, bought in one of the boutiques, landed neatly on Alex's head. It was neatly laid on the square bald head, which made Alex immediately seem to be a short-sighted and slightly ill man. The man stared at the arriving policeman. One was trying to pull a lacy blouse off his shoulder. The second one helped, and both law enforcement officials strained to see who was the culprit behind their ridiculous appearance. At the bottom of the suitcase on the floor was a toy excavator. The device not only imitated the sounds of real construction equipment, but also rhythmically lowered and raised the bucket. It seemed that such a joke was worthy of a 5-year-old child. But no, it was organized by a grown woman who only a few weeks ago managed to avoid a heart attack. At that moment, an unfamiliar voice sounded very close. But Christina immediately realized who it belonged to. Helen drove up in her chair quite briskly. "Well, hello, son." Max bent down to give his mother a hug, a kiss. She guided his neck with beautiful manicured hands. If Christina hadn't seen the woman's face, she would have easily declared that the hands belonged to a well-groomed young girl. On the ring finger of her right hand was a thin gold ring, most likely a wedding band. On her left hand, the woman had a neat white gold bracelet. And on her finger, Christina noticed a diamond ring. The man was so happy to see his mother that he was ready to pick her up in his arms and hold her close to him. But the wheelchair prevented him from doing so. Helen snuggled into the neck of her own son and pronounced, "I missed you very much. I really missed you." Looking at this touching scene, Christina deep down envied both Max and his mother a lot. She had never received any affection or love. She didn't remember her mother. And the teachers of the orphanage did not have enough time or mental resources. Max muttered quietly that he missed his mother too. And his new employee stood next to him and could not believe that her boss was capable of affection and tenderness. It turns out that it's not always a stone wall. That's how Christina began to call her new boss. Can only speak with a cold voice full of ice and gnashing metal. It was amazing to hear the softness and warmth coming from Max's lips. He was completely different from the man who yesterday morning had spoken haughtily to Christina in his office and reprimanded her for allowing herself to stop the interview without his approval. The mask of arrogance quickly fell away with the appearance of the mother. It took its toll on the nurse. Like a blow under the breath, Max smiled genuinely at Helen, and therefore looked several years younger. Christina figured he must be even less than 30. Earlier, when his expression remained cold and haughty, and when his eyes shone with incredible self-confidence, Max looked much older. It gave him a great deal of importance. Now that there was no one else to demonstrate it, it turned out that this man was not just attractive, but damn handsome. The nurse couldn't literally take her eyes off him. She liked literally everything about his swarthy cheekbones, his dimpled chin, his powerful neck, which seemed to be tight in the collar of his shirt. The girl had the urge to undo a few buttons and stroke the mark left on his skin by the stiff fabric. And then she would rise up on her toes and gently touch his lips with hers. So full and firm, she timidly raised her eyes and met his eyes. Big, moist, black ones that inspired fear in them. Christina felt as if she had been hit with ice water. She couldn't believe that all those thoughts that rushed through her head in a hurricane were her own. The remnants of sanity. It was the suitcase situation that decided her. She imagined what she would have to endure while working with Helen. And if she had the nerve to make a childish spectacle of herself in the waiting room of an international airport, just to make her own son smile. Christina turned away abruptly, in the back of her mind berating herself for letting her own brain shut down. She's a mere nanny to his elderly mother, just a caregiver. He's a stonewall, a rich man willing to pay for her labor just for that. He'll have a whole bunch of them, and each one will be ready to look into the mouth of her handsome boss. And for love and everything else, he has a business lady in a strict suit. Her condition. The girl wrote it off as mild stress and a momentary freak out. "How are you feeling, my sweet mom?" In a gentle voice, Max asked, "I think your prank is a direct confirmation of your full recovery. Or didn't you know how to show off the outfits you bought?" The man laughed loudly and his mother laughed back. For a moment, while they were busy with each other, Christina allowed herself to calm down and cool down. And only then did she allow herself to turn around. Mother and son kept their identical black eyes on each other. The whole world seemed to cease to exist for the two of them. And only the new nurse had the opportunity to watch this touching scene as long as she wanted. They were alike, and it wasn't just the eyes. Max had a high forehead and a flat nose and a stubborn chin, all of which he had inherited from his own mother. Even someone who was not distinguished by special knowledge, the gnomish physicist would easily determine that no one in the sight of this couple should hope for pardon. It was then that Christina realized that the fabulous salary that Max had been assigned was not all that great. While Max and his mother were enjoying each other's company, Maria and Alex were busy packing, scattered all over the room. As soon as the suitcase was closed, Alex led away for questioning the people, who until a few minutes ago were thrashing around the hall in search of shelter, again began to walk measuredly and leisurely from corner to corner. Some were waiting for the arrival of the next flight, others, on the contrary, a short time before the departure of their own airplane. The only reminder that recently there was panic and chaos in the hall was Panama, which Alex did not put away in his suitcase, but put on Maria's head. Finally, Max took his eyes off his own mother and turned his attention to Christina. He pointed his finger at her and said, "Meet Christina. This is Christina, your nurse. As long as you live in my house, this girl will accompany you everywhere and help you with anything you need." Helen took her time, turned her neatly tucked head toward Christina, smiled sweetly, and slowly reached out. "But hello, Christina." The tone, the way he spoke. The voice was eerily familiar to the girl, and the look in those big black eyes. Now there would be two of them, young and old. And somehow it seemed that the old woman would be much more trouble than her son. If Christina had not seen with her own eyes the picture of which Helen had become the artist, the girl would have been sure that she was incredibly lucky to have a job. From the outside, her mentee appeared to be the embodiment of charm, elegance, and grace. But beneath the appearance of an elderly angel lurked the nature of a real devil. It should not be forgotten that her son, under every whim and every prank of his mother, did not react in any way except his own smile and loud laughter. One could conclude that the antics that had paralyzed the airport today were in the order of the day with this pair of accomplices. Not even a second passed while these thoughts flashed through Christina's mind. She had time to think about everything in the world, while Helen turned her face from the nurse to her son. "My sweetheart, you said I look healthy, didn't you?" In response to his mother's questions, Max nodded affirmatively. "So explain it to me. A healthy woman is full of vigor. What did you hire this beautiful girl for?" She was the one he didn't tolerate any objections. She seemed to demand an exhaustive answer to her question immediately. "Do you really have a nurse?" "You strong, healthy man has a nurse who follows you around and gives you a spoon or a piece of toilet paper." At this point, Max artistically coughed, trying to suppress another fit of laughter. "I'll be honest with you, sweet mom, that I don't have a caregiver." It was hard to say that the son was being honest with his own mother. Surely she knew nothing about the business lady who was still loudly deciding business matters in Max's office yesterday morning. "Then I'll ask you another question that is especially important to me. Why do I need to be strong, strong, strong? And most importantly, healthy? I need a nurse." The phrase sounded triumphant, and Helen gave Christina a glare. This woman had an ironclad logic. At times, she reminded Christina of a 5-year-old child. The prospect of working in this family seemed less and less bright by the minute. "Aren't we having breakfast together today?" "My darling." Helen sat in the chair and tugged her son's pant leg, trying to get his attention. "Yes, Mommy, of course. We will definitely spend time together, but only after I get home from work. I'm sorry, I have a lot of errands, meetings, negotiations scheduled for today. So you'll have breakfast with Maria and Christina, and maybe Alex, if his domestic orderlies will let you go after your prank." Max laughed again, but quickly pulled himself together. "Work." Helen stretched out in a disappointed voice and sighed heavily. Her eyes childishly filled with tears, and her lower lip moved forward involuntarily. For a moment, Christina felt funny, but she held back, and Helen did too. She just shook her head angrily. "Mom, you realize I can't give up my business and stay home with you. Then we'd have nothing to eat, and we'd have to sell that adorable hat." He smiled slightly and pointed to the Panama, in which Maria was still standing. The girl was at a loss. She was anxious to meet her mother's new nurse. But she was more worried about the young man who had promised to marry her yesterday. And today he'd been taken away by the police to testify. "Give me your word of honor that you'll spend dinner with your family," the woman said flatly. "I promise I'll be home, and I won't say a word about work tonight or tomorrow morning. And I'm at your disposal." Sweet Maman, Max theatrically bowed to his mother. Well, that means we'll have to entertain Christina without you." She gave the nurse a thoughtful look. That didn't sound good. Something told Christina that only one of their small group would be having fun. Nevertheless, the girl leaned over her ward and, trying to seem attractive and friendly, said, "Hello, Helen. I am very glad to meet you. I don't think we'll be bored." "I wasn't going to be bored," the nice woman replied, and smiled that strange smile that inspired the people around her. A quiet horror. Christina felt a chill run down her spine. If earlier she had thought that adult and elderly women spent their leisure time in cultural institutions or at home, then today, after the joke of her ward, realized that she was deeply mistaken. It was possible that she would come up with something new, equally fun. And most likely, that activity would not be on the list Max had provided her. As Christina, Helen, and Max approached the car, everyone suddenly remembered Maria and her lovers. The boss's mother was already sitting in the car, and the driver was stowing the chair in the trunk, when the woman asked in a completely innocent voice what had happened to Alex and if he would go with them. Quietly enough so his sister wouldn't hear. But clearly Max said that he was a grown man and would solve his problems on his own. He, meaning Max, would not be involved in any way. Men always disliked each other and treated each other with a kind of jealousy. Max was not happy about the fact that his sister favored this not soon jump in tight jeans. Besides, Alex was constantly on the lookout for himself, and his sister regularly borrowed money from him. Alex did not like Maria's mother very much either. She preferred to see next to her daughter someone like her own son, as masculine and handsome, with business acumen and flair. They are circus performers who were kicked out of the arena. That's why the object of Helen's jokes and mockery was regularly Alex and not anyone else. "Why are you doing this, Max?" Christina was somewhat indignant. She did not know all the subtleties of relations within the family, and therefore felt indignation. The boss only looked at Christina with cold eyes, and the girl realized that she was facing a stone wall again. The effect of Mom's joke was over. Unbelievable. His mother is putting on a circus on the grounds of the international airport. But he only laughs and not a word of reproach in her direction. Alex, the injured party, will have to deal with what happened. He was just unlucky to carry that damn suitcase. Christina realized that she would not stay in this place for long. As soon as Max thought that she was not a professional, and he had his own scale of criteria for evaluation, the boss would put her out on the street with no severance pay. The three of them drove home Helen, Max, and Christina. Maria stayed at the airport to rescue Alex, who seemed to be tortured at the police station. Max drove the car by himself. Where had the driver gone? No one but the chief knew, and Christina didn't bother to ask. She realized that asking unnecessary questions while staying in this family was strictly forbidden. Helen seemed to have turned into a child again. She suddenly laughed and began to talk about how the suitcase in Alex's hands had burst. "No, you heard it all at once. And oh, where to run, what to do. I'll tell Lisa today. She'll laugh." And Lisa, the maid at Max's house who'd been working for him for over 10 years. She was a grown woman who had become a member of the family. Her boss liked her a lot, executive, responsible, never asks too many questions and gets things done quickly, and had become friends with his mother. Helen seemed particularly pleased with herself right now, and Christina's boss liked that. He was one of those kids who did everything possible and impossible to please their elderly parents. They usually feel that every second of life can be the last. Therefore, let it be filled with joy and fun. Phew, But I did it for something. It turned out that Max is not as hopeless as it seems at first glance. He asked questions without taking his eyes off the road. Max, what did I do? I mean, the backhoe turned on. I'm sure it was Maria who put the toy in my suitcase by accident. I found the remote control in my jacket pocket. To be honest, I mistook it for the one that came with my chair. You know, the doctor said that if I get tired, I can change the position under my elbow or pillows near my neck. Helen quickly turned the conversation to another topic, hoping that her son would be quickly distracted, concerned about his own mother's comfort and convenience. Max, however, was relentless. He continued to ask his mother leading questions and enjoyed watching her try to extricate herself from the situation. Helen, anxious, thrashed in her chair. Once again, she reminded Christina of a child who had given birth and was now trying to get away with it. Okay, son, I'm sorry. I just really missed you. All right. I'll apologize too. The mother realized that there was no point in trying to get away with it anymore, so she admitted her own guilt. But it didn't upset her in the slightest. Tell me, please, were you fed on the plane? The doctor told me that you need to eat by the hour and be sure to take the prescribed medication. Max realized that it was time to end the conversation with the circus performance, so he turned to the questions that really bothered him. Yes, son, they served fish, which, as you know, I can't stand. The obliging stewardess tried her best to feed me, but when she realized it was useless, she put my portion in a box and made sure I picked it up on the way off the plane. Helen's story was fascinating. She seemed to like the attention of others and was making a maximal effort to keep it as long as possible. It's okay, we'll get there. And I'll be sure to feed Zeus. Finished the monologue with the boss's mom. Christina had yet to meet Zeus. The big Caucasian sheepdog lived in the backyard in an aviary, and at night it was kept on the whole territory of the mansion, warning the owner in case of danger. The dog had lived with the owner since the house was built and had become a member of the family. If something had happened to Zeus, Max wouldn't have survived it. The company, consisting of the mother's son and her newfound nurse, reached home quickly enough and without any adventures. This especially pleased Christina, who had not yet had time to come to her senses after what she had seen at the airport. Helen, tired from the long flight and emotions, dozed off in the car. "We are home, Mom," solemnly declared Max, stopping the car at the gate. "Really?" Helen said, waking up. It hadn't even been 6 months. She demanded to be taken out of the car immediately and said that she would walk home. She's full of energy and completely healthy. And this chair was invented by the doctors to make her, and Helen believed that age is a judgment, and that the surgery she has undergone prohibits her from enjoying life and doing what she wants to do. On the way home, the mother walked leaning on her son. Helen looked like the ultimate conspirator and said she was going to show him her greatest treasure. "Mom, let's have your finds. Will you share with Christina? I have no doubt that another diamond necklace with emeralds will be a splurge. Look with the dress that you showed in the morning to a good half of the waiting room. Now I'm really in a terrible hurry." Max tried with all his might to turn his mother's attention to Christina. Helen did not even turn her head in the direction of the nurse. It was a secret that concerned only her and her son. "I will appreciate your find tonight. I swear to you," Max promised. Helen nodded contentedly and entered the house on her own, letting go of her son's hand. She held the lady's purse tightly in her hands. It was there that something of particular value to the woman was kept. Christina was visited by a feeling of slight envy. She always wanted a beautiful life, but the luxury for the girl was traveling by cab instead of streetcar or bus. One thing she did have, however. This piece of jewelry had no price. Her mother's earring, which was found near the crash site. The other one was never found, most likely burned with the body. Christina received the treasure on the day of her majority. The earrings were kept in the safe of the director of the orphanage, and the girl did not even suspect what gift the educators had prepared for her. The girl has always been on a good account. She did not enter into conflicts and always went towards helping everyone who needed it. "I hope you two will find common ground," grinned Max and returned to the car. Christina tried to assure him that she would find a common language with her mother, but she realized that it would be difficult and would take a long time. If someone asked the girl to make a rating of the most dangerous professions, the first on the list would be the position of a caregiver. Before meeting Helen, Christina was convinced that the ideal nanny for an elderly woman. However, Lady Perfection has failed. To please the new ward turned out to be quite difficult. If at the airport and in the car the woman was cheerful and actively participated in conversations, then it was worth it to cross the threshold of the house, as she became an exact copy of her son in the image of a stone wall. The woman silently drank a glass of water, drinking the prescribed medicine, demanded help to disassemble the suitcases, and stated that she wanted to stay alone. But no sooner had Christina left her ward's room than the door opened and Lisa, Max's housekeeper, appeared on the threshold. She seemed to Christina rather stern and not talkative, but not in Helen's company. The women, like two good old friends, hugged for a long time and even cried. After hugs, Lisa said that she was preparing a festive dinner and would be happy to see Lenotchka in her place of honor. Christina suggested to her ward to go downstairs and have something to eat. She remembered the morning conversation and realized that the woman still hadn't eaten. Helen, however, waved her head negatively and settled down on the bed. She defiantly turned away from Christina, and the girl, who had experience with such individuals, took a seat in the corner on a chair and opened a book lying on the table. The first thing that caught my eye, not the title written in Chinese, but the bookmark. An old photograph served for that purpose. On it, as Christina guessed, was Helen. And standing next to it were Max and Maria. So there had to be another child in this family. Strange, why hadn't he or she come to the airport to meet their mom? Christina would have given everything she owned in this world just to see her parents. She was so engrossed in the photo shoot that she started to look at the smallest details. Even then, Helen dressed beautifully and made sure that the children were neat and back. But the young and attractive woman had a light dress and a buildable fabric. It pulled her belly in nicely, drawing attention to it. Maria was dressed in a sundress and two long braids with white bows tied at the sides. Max, dressed in shorts and a shirt, even then looked like a real man who could be trusted with the whole world. The girl did not notice how the time flew by. She was immersed in her own memories and tears came to her eyes. Christina did not notice how loud the sobs knew and woke Helen. She was looking at the girl curiously and didn't understand why the new nurse seemed so familiar. Christina, on the other hand, looking at the details, recognized the earrings, a similar piece. She kept it carefully in the pocket of her purse, and on her birthday, she made sure to wear it when she was alone. Christina did not like noisy companies, and therefore every year she bought a bottle of champagne and a cake, and celebrated the holiday alone. She took out the most elegant dress, did her hair and put on her mother's earring. Despite the fact that she never managed to get acquainted with her own parents. The girl never tired of thanking them for the gift of life and sharing news and achievements. The girl understood that in those days it was very difficult to get beautiful jewelry. But she could not call this situation other than a coincidence. She wanted to ask Helen where the earrings had come from and whether she still had them, but she remembered that no one in this family liked unnecessary questions. Christina shuddered at the touch that brought the girl back to reality. Helen woke up. She slowly got out of bed and approached Christina. The woman didn't understand why the girl was so interested in the old photo. Yes, there were times when they were happy as a family. Back then, Helen, a young and beautiful mother of two, was waiting for the arrival of her youngest daughter. She and Greg, Father Max, were happy. Doctors said that after the birth of Maria, Helen was unlikely to be able to carry a baby again. But they were wrong. Returning from vacation, Helen complained more and more often of feeling unwell, nausea, and dizziness. But after a visit to the gynecologist, everything fell into place. She was given one of the most satisfying diagnoses ever. She will soon be a mom again. In gratitude for this joyful news, Greg presented his wife with a pair of exclusive earrings. There were simply no analogs of such a product. He personally drew a sketch and gave it to an acquaintance of the jeweler. Not everyone could afford such luxury. That evening, the couple left the children with a nanny. They sometimes invited a neighbor to look after Max and the little one, and went to the movies themselves. Helen and Greg were happy to know that they would soon be young parents again. Their financial situation and social status allowed them to raise another baby. 9 months flew by like a blink of an eye. Helen gave birth to a healthy, strong baby girl who looked like her father. It was decided not to take the older children to the discharge from the maternity hospital. Greg personally drove the car, and Helen held the baby girl in her arms. She didn't bother to buckle up. It was uncomfortable and hot. And her husband always drove the vehicle carefully. But not that day. The car skidded on a bend. It turned over several times and caught fire. Emergency personnel arrived on the scene and found the little girl requiring long-term treatment, while EMTs tried to get her parents out of the burning car. Helen and Greg spent a long time in intensive care, and there was practically no chance to save them. The doctors made a disappointing diagnosis, and therefore it was decided to transfer the girl, who miraculously managed to survive, to a baby home. The older children spent all this time with relatives. And when Helen and Greg came to their senses, they were informed that the little girl had died. The hospital staff decided that the young couple would have too much money to spend on their own recovery, and they had 2 more children on their necks. One of the nurses who was on call that day found an earring near the burned-out car, a rare piece of white gold jewelry. The honest girl handed the treasure to the workers of the baby home, where the girl was given, and asked it to be sure to pass the jewelry to her owner. After the child grows up, for the luck of the pupil in that orphanage worked teachers from God. When the girl reached adulthood, she was presented with an amazing gift, greetings from Mom and Dad from the other side of the world. Helen and Greg long experienced the bitterness of loss. Not only did they spend more than a year in hospitals and clinics, it took them even more time with psychologists. Helen's husband blamed himself for the accident that killed their newborn daughter. Helen tried with all her might to convince her husband that he was wrong. After 5 years of agony, Greg died. His heart could not withstand the constant pricking of his conscience. Dying, the father, who had lost his daughter, said that he was going to her, and the older children were left in the care of their mother. Despite the fact that more than 20 years had passed since that terrible accident, Helen remembered everything that had happened to them. She regularly went to the cemetery where her daughter and husband were buried, bringing flowers and toys. When her son announced that Helen was going to Germany for surgery, the woman was outraged and she couldn't leave just yet. Her dead daughter's birthday was coming up and Helen was bound to visit her grave and talk to the little girl. Max assured his mother that he would drive himself to the cemetery and take whatever his mother said. Frankly, he thought it was time to stop taking what had happened 20 years ago so seriously. Helen arrived in Germany a few days early. She had expressed a desire to go shopping in malls and furniture stores. Her son's financial situation allowed her to buy anything she liked. During one of the shopping trips, Helen stumbled upon an antique shop quite by accident. Her son loved antiques, and the woman knew how to make him feel good. She was perusing the display cases and racks when she saw earrings on one of the shelves. The woman immediately forgot about gifts for her son and began to think about what kind of dress she could wear with this or that set. Her attention was attracted by a single piece of jewelry. When Helen took a closer look, her whole life seemed to flash before her eyes. She immediately remembered the day when Greg, her late husband, had given her earrings based on a unique design. She remembered the accident and her husband's agony. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Please tell me, where is the second earring? I would like to buy this set." She turned to the seller of the antique shop. "This earring is sold alone for more than 10 years, lying on the counter, and does not cause anyone's interest. Can you imagine? Everyone wants a set. It is understandable." The seller was genuinely surprised that someone was interested in this product. The earring was brought to the store many years ago by a woman. She did not know the history of this product. She only said that she had found it on the street and wanted to get some money. Since then, the white gold earring with a small scattering of diamonds lay on the counter and did not arouse interest among customers until Helen stepped over the threshold. At that moment, she was ready to give any money just to buy what was once rightfully hers. It seemed that this purchase would give her back a piece of the past, bring back memories of those days when they were all happy, when she had her little girl in her arms and knew that Papa, her older brother, and sister were waiting for them eagerly at home. It was about this discovery Helen had been so eager to tell her own son, the businessman, and that man. And now when she woke up to find her new caregiver, Christina, scrutinizing photos of the family and crying bitterly. "What's the matter? Baby, did a picture of my whole family happy upset you so much?" Helen asked politely. Hugging a girl? Christina not only didn't expect her ward to wake up so unexpectedly, but also didn't think that the woman would take part and ask what was the reason for her sudden tears. No one had ever been so polite to the girl. She could no longer hold back her emotions. The girl cried and told everything that had happened to her in her short but so bitter life. The girl knew that, most likely, after such an act, the owner would ask her to leave her post as a caregiver. But she could not help herself. Tears rolled from her eyes without stopping. She told Helen that she had grown up in an orphanage and had not known parental love and affection. That she had had to work from an early age to make ends meet, and now she had to look after other people's parents to earn her bread. She regretted very much that she had never seen her own father and mother. Helen clasped the girl tightly to her breast and whispered, "Well, will you be good to cry? We all have a hard life." And then Helen began to tell her story. When she reached that period of her life, when she experienced the joy of motherhood for the third time, the woman could not resist and cried too. She decided that she could open up to this bright, defenseless girl. Helen opened her handbag and took out an earring. "Look, it's from my past. My late husband gave me the earrings for giving him a daughter. She died in a terrible accident, and her husband died a few years later, couldn't bear the loss a few weeks ago. I saw this earring by chance in a store overseas. I know I can't be wrong. This set was one of a kind and unmatched. My husband made them especially for me." Christina listened to the story of this amazing woman and could not believe her own ears. Was it really true? The girl slowly stood up and walked to her bag. Helen looked questioningly at her nurse and did not understand what was going on. Didn't understand exactly until the girl pulled out the exact same earring. The set was connected. Both of them stood in the middle of the room and looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. No, both Christina and Helen made a logical connection in their heads, but couldn't believe that this was really happening to them. And it's not a dream. "My daughter, my sweet girl. All these years I've mourned you and carried toys and presents to the cemetery. And you're here, alive and well," cried Helen, hugging and kissing the one she wanted to send away 2 hours ago, just to convince her son that she didn't need a nurse. They spent the entire afternoon like that. When Max got home, he was concerned as to why his mother still hadn't gone downstairs, and handed out directions to anyone who would come across her path. The man went up to the second floor and froze in front of the bedroom door that was meant for Helen. He heard someone crying in the room. And without even waiting for someone to answer his knock, he entered abruptly. The man was genuinely surprised to see his mother. The strong and unapproachable woman was sitting on the bed next to Christina, a simple nurse who had been hired for the job only yesterday. It was hard to imagine that someone could melt her heart in such a short period of time. "Mom, what's going on here?" "Christina, please explain to me why a woman who's just had surgery is in a state of hysteria. You were tasked with keeping her calm and happy, and you are completely failing in your duties." The stone wall spoke, and there was no way to stop it. Max was angry and preparing to fire the caregiver he had just hired. "No severance pay. Christina, you can pack up and leave this house. You're fired." He said those words in his usual cold voice. There was no trace of the man who had laughed at his mother's stupid jokes that morning. "Max, stop. First, let us explain to you everything that happened. And then we'll see if you can fire someone or take it back." Helen's voice sounded equally harsh and cold, and so the son simply froze. The first thing the woman in Serbia showed him was a picture of Helen's mom standing exactly in them. The son knew the story that once long ago his father had given his mother a unique gift. Few people in those days could please their spouses with exclusive white gold earrings. He also knew that those earrings had been irretrievably lost during the terrible fire in which their little sister had died. And now, when he saw them in his mother's hands, the man was speechless. He couldn't believe his own eyes and didn't want to believe his own ears. Until his mother told him that she had found the second earring in one of the stores. Max was sure that Christina had simply made up the story. But there was nothing to reproach her for. Everything really did match up. Could it be that this girl, who as recently as yesterday morning had returned tail and allowed herself to assert her own point of view, had turned out to be his own sister? The girl who years ago, they all believed, had died in a car accident. The man's eyes filled with tears. He let his feelings come out, hugged Christina, and asked for her forgiveness. He had no idea what to say in such situations, so he simply apologized. He felt guilty for speaking rudely to Christina during the interview and at the airport. Max realized he had become completely confused. My favorite girls, pull yourselves together. We are waiting for a wonderful holiday dinner, prepared and Lisa. Imagine her hysterics if she finds out that Helen suddenly has a grown-up daughter. Max laughed. He hugged his mom and sister and motioned for them to come downstairs. As they opened the door, they heard Alex and Maria enter the house. Let's not say anything to them yet. Let Maria show her sister what she can do. Max laughed and winked at his mother. Don't worry, no one will give you offense in this house. But I must say that your sister is a very spoiled person. She doesn't tolerate competition, and she's used to having all the attention in this family, Helen warned. She still couldn't believe that this was happening to her, that the daughter she had mourned and thought dead for over 20 years was alive and standing next to her. There were hysterical screams coming from the first floor. Maria was sharing the events of the day. It turns out that Alex had spent all that time in the police station. He was proving to the law enforcement representatives that he had nothing to do with terrorist organizations, and what happened was just a stupid joke. His future mother-in-laws. Maria met Alex a few years ago. Then her mother insisted that Max paid for her sister's trip to a foreign camp. The girl was going through a breakup with her first love and badly needed positive emotions. Her son did not argue with Helen, but simply gave as much money as was needed to pay for the vacation and flight. Maria had a wonderful 2 weeks there, enjoying socializing with her peers and being under the close supervision of psychologists. To the surprise of the family, Maria did not pull any tricks, but she surprised everyone by the fact that after arriving home, she continued to communicate with one of the same vacationers. His name was Alex. His parents sent the boy on vacation after a hard study. Returning from the camp in France, Alex soon appeared on the doorstep of the house where Maria lived and said that he could not live without her. To say that the relatives were dumbfounded, nothing to say. Even Maria was in a slight shock. However, the young people made a promise not to do anything stupid and kept it for several years. Between them, more and more often began to talk about marriage. And a few months ago, Alex introduced Maria to his parents. They spent 2 weeks in France, from where they flew to Germany and returned with Helen. It was hard to explain why Maria and Max's mother didn't take this man seriously. His appearance truly resembled that of a clown. When Helen decided to pull a prank at the airport, she had no idea where it would lead. Maybe it was for the best. Let the guy learn to get out of difficult situations on his own. Especially since life together with her daughter is a series of difficult situations and endless adventures. Alex spent the whole day today to explain to the police in broken English that he is a good French citizen who came to visit his fiancée's family. The difficulty was that Maria was not allowed into the office until she had legal status. Spouses have no right to take part in investigations and proceedings. However, it was money that helped them cope with the difficulties. Thanks to her brother, Maria never needed it. No, she didn't sit on her brother's neck. Maria held a decent position in his company, and it should be noted, reached this position. Not through family connections, but only through her own knowledge and skills. Max always reprimanded her severely in meetings. If the occasion arose, but also honestly praised her for her professional accomplishments. The only indulgence that the boss allowed himself to regularly please his sister was a salary an order of magnitude higher than that of her colleagues. This topic was off limits for discussion in the office. The employees knew that Max did not tolerate gossip. The man was always ready for open conversations and boldly responded to any complaints from the employees. If he noticed that someone was whispering in the corners, he always called for a conversation, which was usually followed by dismissal. When the passion downstairs had subsided, Christina and Helen went down to the first floor. "Hello, mine. Never waning," the mother said wryly to Maria. "Do you have any idea what Allie and Mom had to go through? Why did you make this circus? Explain it to me, please." Max intervened in the conversation. He really liked the prank, and although he treated Alex respectfully, he didn't try to hide the fact that Mom came up with a funny prank. Everyone understood that for such a joke, a French citizen could be deported to his country without the right to return. Then Maria would have become the wife of a French Decembrist. Surely his sister would have boarded the first plane to Paris and sought a date with a persistent troublemaker. These thoughts made Max laugh. He laughed loudly, which caused astonishment among the others, and hurried to share his thoughts. After everyone had laughed quite a bit, Maria asked a very appropriate question. Since when would a simple caregiver sit at the table with them and listen to them indulge in family memories? Indeed, every dinner with the family, Max, Maria, and Helen, was filled with warm conversations about their father, their childhood, and their family traditions. The children, as Helen used to call them, told her their secrets, and she, in turn, made a surprised face and made them believe that until now she did not even suspect what had happened. Helen was in no hurry to please Maria with the fact that she had a younger sister, despite the fact that she had grown up a spoiled girl. She was kind and sympathetic at heart, and always responded warmly to her mother's requests to visit her sister's grave in the cemetery. When asked why Christina was given a seat at the table, her mother replied that she could get dizzy and had to get used to having someone there to support her and help her, but she was satisfied with that explanation. Despite the insulting grimace on her face towards Christina, she softened nonetheless. The girls assigned a seat next to Alex, who, despite the joke organized by Helen, arrived for dinner with a gorgeous bouquet of flowers for his future mother-in-law. He was still wearing 2 tight jeans. What caused another fit of laughter when he appeared on the doorstep? It seemed that today's surprises had come to an end, but it wasn't. The front door swung open, and the one who had swept past Christina yesterday and given her a less than welcoming look appeared on the doorstep. She seemed to have come straight from a business meeting. In another strict suit, styled hair, stilettos, and an unchanged file folder in hand. "Good evening. I'm sorry, I didn't realize Max had nice guests. We were supposed to spend the evening together, and especially frozen on the threshold because no one invited her into the house. And what's more, there were no dishes for her at the table." What was especially unlike Max, if he invited someone to visit, he was always zealous to make sure that the guest was comfortable. He didn't seem to care about the businesswoman's comfort at all. "Jenna, I think I've made it clear to you that I'm busy tonight." Max said these words in such a cold voice that Christina felt horror, just like the day of the interview. However, the whole situation brought joy to Helen and Max. Looking into his mother's eyes, let her enjoy talking to the unexpected guest. "Well, what are you, son?" heaping a girl on the doorstep. "Come in, dear Jenna. Visitors are always welcome in our home." Affectionately. "What was that?" Completely out of character for a mother, Helen said. She looked like a rainbow hostess now, ready to feed anyone. But Jenna had no idea what a dangerous trap she had fallen into quite willingly. "Meet Maria, my daughter Alex, and her boyfriend." "Well, Max, you know, Christina." Helen did not have time to finish, as she saw on Jenna's face irritation and contempt. The girl immediately reported that she could not stand it when servants sit at the same table with the owners. She compared such behavior with the situation when an ordinary employee took part in important negotiations on an equal footing with the boss. By the way, Jenna was that ordinary employee. She brewed not the most delicious coffee and brought Max papers to sign. She got her position only because of her long legs and the beautiful, even smile of Max's partner. Solid men liked to be greeted by a friendly girl. The tired, tortured secretary who had served the company since its inception and was the boss's right-hand woman. Helen, realizing that a stone had been thrown into the vegetable garden, her newfound daughter decided to remind the florist that she was just a simple rank and file employee who had just broken into a board meeting and was trying to take an active part. But the girl didn't even seem to pay attention to the remark. She was engrossed in trying to draw Max's attention to herself. Those sitting at the table suddenly looked at each other and laughed loudly. Everyone remembered the incident at the airport. Jenna sat, not realizing what was going on, and just drank water, courteously served, and Lisa, on the girl's luck, the housekeeper, brought dinner. And the family was somewhat distracted by the tweaking of the guest. When everyone was fed and satisfied, Alex asked permission to speak. Helen realized that something was about to transpire that she still wasn't ready to hear. Indeed, the young man confessed that he had loved her daughter for a very long time and wished Maria to become his lawfully wedded wife. He immediately hastened to assure the members of his new family that he had no intention of taking the girl to France. Alex applied for citizenship and even found a permanent job. A large company was actively looking for a professional, experienced programmer and was ready to pay decent money for Alex's knowledge. Maria cried from joy and surprise. She did not even suspect that her boyfriend was coming to USA not just for fun, but with the most serious intentions. The girl responded by agreeing to the marriage proposal and began to accept congratulations. At that moment, she allowed Christina to hug herself. If the mother has penetrated trust to this person, then she has nothing to share with the nurse. Jenna also allowed herself to make a congratulatory speech. The girl decided to take the initiative in her own hands and told those gathered at the table that she and Max were in a close enough relationship and could also announce the wedding. At that moment, you should have just seen Max's face. His eyes turned cold and angry. "Well, my son proposed to you, but he didn't tell me anything," Helen asked snidely. This person's statement did not cause her any emotion except laughter. The woman realized that her son was an intelligent and responsible man who could pay attention to a person like Jenna. Only in one single instance, she had never been a prude and realized that it would be better to have a temporary relationship with such a doll than a year of loneliness. Maria jumped with laughter. She realized that after what Jenna had said, she would only have to pack her things from her desk and leave the company's walls forever. Christina also realized that. She was ashamed of herself, but the girl was even happy about this outcome. She did not like this businesswoman even before she ran into her in the lobby. Only Alex was indifferent to this story. He did not understand Russian speech well and laughed only because his future spouse did. Max got up from the table, approached Jenna, and sharply pushed her chair away. "I'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. In my office with a letter of resignation. I made no promises about our marriage. There's no need to mislead my family. They might think I'm crazy for deciding to commit my life to you." The girl blushed and, trying to object to what she heard, was quickly dispensed with. She didn't even say goodbye, jumped out of the house, slammed the door of her own car. It was heard how sharply she moved. "Will there be any more news?" Maria burst into laughter and couldn't stop. Helen said slowly, "Today this news struck me to the core." Her voice a few minutes ago joyful suddenly became serious. "Mom, something happened in my heart. The operation didn't go well. What's the matter?" She wouldn't have survived if anything bad had happened to her mother. No, my girl is fine." Helen hurried to reassure her daughter. She asked everyone present to just listen carefully to the story the mother wanted to tell her children. When she started the story about how all the family was eagerly waiting for the birth of their sister, Maria exhaled. She was ready to listen to the story as many times as she wanted, knowing that her mother was okay. So Lisa brought a large pot of tea and joined the large family. She had long since become a full member of the family, but she never allowed herself to sit down at the table with everyone else. Only after dinner was served and the kitchen was in order, she made her favorite tea and let herself indulge in memories, along with everyone else. Helen spoke at length today, and with a special feeling, everyone at the table had tears running down their cheeks. It seemed that even Alex, who could hardly perceive Russian speech, was penetrated by the story. And there were quiet sobs. When the mother got to the point where she discovered an earring given by her father in a store in Germany, she cried. Christina allowed herself to intervene and continue the story, which caused Maria's surprise. Only Max seemed to remain calm. In his heart, he was uncontrollably glad that the girl for whom so many tears had been shed was alive and well. She had come to their house on her own. One should thank fate and God for that. Christina began her story, and not everyone could understand how it related to what Helen had just told. Couldn't understand until it was about the Serbs. The girl pulled 2 earrings out of the purse she had thoughtfully brought with her. It was them, the ones her mother had been looking at for a long time in the picture. Max had once suggested that she order the exact same ones from a jeweler. Helen flatly refused. She said she didn't plan to enter the same river twice. It was a memory of her father, and let it remain his memory forever. Then the son bought his mother an extraordinarily beautiful set of exactly that ring. This morning, Christina noticed the wart on her hand. Upon realizing what was happening, Maria cried, unashamed of her tears, and hugged Christina tightly. Through her tears, she laughed and stated that it was a good thing they didn't have time to socialize. She has a terrible temper, and now she would have to apologize for any rudeness for sure. Now she would only have to apologize for the fact that all this time none of them had known that she was the youngest and most beloved sister alive. The evening seemed to be endless. When the tea was finished, the whole family moved to the floor of the fireplace. The children surrounded their mother and had long conversations about what their lives had been like. Christina told much about her past. It was already Maria and Max. They were tormented by guilt that their sister didn't have everything she owned. As the time passed midnight, Helen declared that she was immensely tired for today. Even though she felt strong and healthy after the surgery, such a shock was not easy to bear. She went to bed and insisted that Christina would definitely spend that night in her bedroom. The girl promised that as soon as they got ready for bed, she would come to her mother's room. Alex also apologized and withdrew. He had not just endured a hard flight, but was having a hard time getting used to the time difference. No one dared to take offense at him. Maria and Max wanted to spend time alone with their sister. Max hugged his sisters and suggested to celebrate such an event with a glass of champagne. It was a real miracle, which happens only once in a lifetime. And then not everyone. Sitting at the table, they began to discuss the future. That Christina was moving into her brother's house. It was agreed without reservation. Then there was the question of who would take care of Mom. She needed a nurse again, a girl who had just found a family. She dreamed of it all her life. She declared that she wasn't going to quit her hard-won position. She and her brother laughed and told Maria about how hard it was to get an interview. Max's. They sat at the table in the kitchen for a long time, sipping champagne and making plans for the future. None of them so happy did not know that in the morning, when they woke up, life would not be the same. None of them suspected that the mother who had just found her dead daughter would not be able to stand such happiness. When Helen stated that she was tired and wished to go to bed, she was not lying. The woman was indeed feeling exhausted. Moreover, her heart ached again, but she did not want to spoil the children's joy of the family reunion. She reached the bedroom, sat down on the bed, and passed out. Helen didn't have time to take the pill that could have saved her life. The children discovered the body in the early hours of the morning, as they were escorting Christina to her new bedroom. No one knew that the next day a hurt Jenna would go to the police and file a report that Max had been molesting her regularly. No one knew the cops would come for Alex too. Money doesn't always solve problems. The case of the explosion at the international airport will not be so easy to solve. But all this will happen only tomorrow, when the new day comes. And today, these three were so happy, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking champagne, and could not believe that after 20 years their family was reunited. Max and Maria believed that the father had helped the children find each other. Before he died, he announced that he was going in search of his dead daughter. When the bottle of delicious French drink was drunk, the young people hugged each other tightly and decided to walk their sister to the bedroom in friendship.